Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 true horror stories from the world's darkest and oldest graveyards, we travel deep into the forgotten corners of the earth, where time sleeps but the dead do not. These are the stories buried beneath centuries of stone and silence, haunted crypts in London, cursed mausoleums in Paris, and ancient graves where the air still remembers every whisper. Each account you're about to hear comes from those who've walked too close to the edge, historians, travelers and caretakers who've seen things no living soul should see. In places where even the wind dares not linger, they've found proof that death is not always the end. My goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers listen and vanish without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's an old graveyard near you that makes your skin crawl, type its name below. Because when the gates close and the candles go out, the oldest graves remember who's still walking above them. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I don't care if anyone believes me. I just need to put this out there before it keeps eating at me. My name doesn't matter. But I'm a historian who picks up freelance cataloging jobs for old sites around London. Churchyards, memorial plaques, the kind of quiet work where you wear the same waterproof jacket for days and learn the smell of damp stone like it's a person. Last autumn I landed a small grant to help the Friends of Highgate Cemetery update their inventory of Victorian graves, mostly inscriptions and condition notes. It sounded peaceful. A notebook, a camera, a few hours among angels and ivy, and the constant soft clatter of magpies. I told my younger sister, Leah, that it would be good for me. Fresh air, money that didn't come from marking essays, a project where you could see progress at the end of each day. She laughed and said it was very on brand, and made me promise to bring her a ghost story if I found one. The joke is that I did, and now I can't make it stop. If you've never been to Highgate, it's bounded by ordinary London life. Terraced houses, a pub with a chalkboard that always announces something about sticky toffee pudding, buses grumbling up the hill. You pass through the gates and the city thins to a hush. Even tourists lower their voices. Statues of Victorian grief lean and their moss looks like old velvet. I was assigned to the west side that week, the older, more theatrical half, and my point of contact was a caretaker named Keats. He was near 60, with a habit of speaking like every sentence had to be weighed first. The first morning, he handed me a laminated map and a bunch of keys that jangled like something a stagehand would keep. "Don't go looking for Bram Stoker," he said. "He's not here," everyone asks. "And if you see the Fox family, don't feed them." I told him I wasn't that sort of visitor. He gave me a long look and said, "Nobody thinks they are until nighttime." I started in a corner called the Circle of Lebanon, a sunken ring of family vaults built around an enormous cedar tree. The air had that cool under-earth feeling, like an unlit pantry where the cold sits. My job was simple. Field sketches of stonework, transcribe Latin, note any damage. The mausoleums up there have doors. Iron, some with louvres, most sealed with plaster or bolts a century ago. Each with a name above. White, Barrow, Lang Winters. I had a rhythm by the second day. Take a photo, read, copy, step to the next. My friend Imogen, who's a photographer and whose idea of a good time is pointing a lens at light through fog, came on the third day to shoot reference images for me. She likes to tease me for loving paperwork. We moved in quiet, our footsteps knocking hollow on the old stone floor of the circle, our breath visible in threads whenever we stepped into shade. There was one vault I hadn't noticed on the map. It sat a little off the ring, up 2 steps facing the path but slightly turned as if caught mid-thought. Its lintel read Hollingsworth, and below the name, "In sure and certain hope of the resurrection, 1883. The iron door was dull with age. A rosette pattern ran round the edge, half-eaten by rust. A dollop of plaster filled the keyhole, old enough to have hairline cracks. It looked like all the others, except it didn't. It had that feeling of being seen by something that isn't there. Imogen took a picture. "Good type," she said, meaning the lettering. I tried to find Hollingsworth on my list and couldn't. I chalked it up to a simple omission. These lists are always incomplete, but wrote it down to ask Keats. We spent the afternoon moving between vaults. I read aloud sometimes because it helps me hear mistakes in my transcription. On a whim, I said, in the general direction of Hollingsworth, "Beloved husband and father, Samuel Hollingsworth, sealed in 1883. Imogen laughed and told me to stop giving addresses to the dead, that it was rude. As we packed to leave, a breath of cool air brushed my neck. I turned, no one was behind me. A magpie hopped on the cedar root with the wet slow motion of a bird choosing whether to be a sign. "Did you feel that?" I asked. Imogen shook her head. "You're the one who reads Latin in a crypt and expects sunshine," she said. I asked Keats about Hollingsworth when we returned the keys. He rubbed at his beard and frowned into the middle distance. "That family didn't stay long," he said finally. "If they were ever there. Some vaults had their contents removed, reinterred. Early 20th century. That was a fashion too, for a while." When I tried to press, he waved his hand like clearing smoke. "Check the archive room tomorrow. There's a Hollingsworth ledger we can't account for. Might give you something to write." There was no ledger the next day. The archivist, a man named Paul with clean hands and a smile that didn't travel far, apologized and said old deeds had been misfiled for months. He mentioned volunteers coming and going, students scanning, everyone meaning well, everything ending up in the wrong neat pile. I went back to the circle and made myself focus. There's real work to be done, and I am the sort of person who likes to win at small, measurable tasks. I avoided Hollingsworth in that way people avoid making eye contact with a busker. Around midday, I dropped my pencil. It rolled, and I followed it onto my knees near the 2 steps leading to the Hollingsworth door. I heard something then, clear enough that I dispensed with all the usual polite self-deception about wind and birdsong, a voice low as a spoken secret from behind the iron. Not yet. I'd tell myself I didn't move for a count of 5. Then I stood abruptly and nearly fell backward down the steps. Imogen wasn't with me that day. A couple in bright raincoats were at the far end of the ring, arguing in hushed tones about whether it was ethical to take selfies by graves. The voice had been nothing like theirs. I did the stupid thing where you test the obvious and put my ear to the door. The iron tasted like pennies. I waited. The quiet pressed. Then, because my brain is broken and trained to choose the least smart option when frightened, I said, "What do you mean?" The voice came again, the same breathless closeness, and said, "Not yet. You will." I could have gone back to the office and told Paul or Keats. I did not. I am not naive about my profession. We run on grants that depend on us being rational. I told myself it was an acoustic anomaly. The circle amplifies. Maybe someone whispered and the sound traveled along stone. I tried to calculate angles in my head and realized I was doing anything but think the thing directly. I took a long loop around the paths, pretending to expand my survey area, and came back when my heart stopped hammering. At 4, I found I'd been avoiding the vault like it owed me money. I walked up to the door and said in the mild professional voice you use when talking to a stranger's tired dog, "Is anyone in there?" There was the faintest scrape like cloth on stone, then the voice again, and this time it used my name. The name only my sister uses, the nickname I haven't heard from anyone else in 15 years. "Don't," it said sweetly like a warning dressed up as care. "Don't do that, nickname." Not yet. I didn't remember dropping my notebook, but it hit the step and the sound snapped a tourist out of his trance. A guy in a beanie looked over and said, "You all right, mate?" I told him I'd startled a pigeon. He looked past me with a friendly curiosity that made me want to bolt and never come back. I packed up and left in a neat hurry, telling myself I'd tell Keats tomorrow. I did not sleep well. Coastline noise moves through my flat at night. The hiss of buses, late laughter, radiator expansion. And I kept thinking I could hear that same close voice braiding itself into the ordinary sounds of home. I played white noise too loud and woke at 4 to the hollow silence that only happens when your phone dies in the night. Leah called at 10 the next morning. "Did you bring me a ghost yet?" she asked. She works at a bakery that smells like sugar and salt and never quite gets the flour out of her hair. I told her weakly that I might have something, probably a weird echo. She told me not to go back alone. I told her that wasn't realistic. She said, "I'm not kidding," in the voice she uses for when I get too academic about living. I promised to meet her after work for coffee. I did not keep that promise. I took a small audio recorder with me. Academic, I told myself. Documentation, exposure therapy for the brain. I asked Imogen to swing by in the afternoon, and she said she had a shoot in Hampstead but could pop over for half an hour. I started at Hollingsworth that day as if proving I could. I held the recorder in my right hand and stood again at the door. There was still plaster in the keyhole, cracked but firm. I asked an ordinary question, one I often put to stones out loud because talking helps me think. What is your inscription? A moment passed. I felt the sort of thrill you get before a storm. Then a whisper threaded into my ear that wasn't my own voice bouncing back. You write the line, it said, almost playful. Then I answer. That was absurd and paralyzing, and I should have left. Instead, I did what you do when something impossible happens. You force it to be small. I said, without thinking. In sure and certain hope of the resurrection, 1883. The whisper didn't repeat me. It said, not yet. It had the same tone a parent uses when a child reaches too close to a flame. The recorder in my hand felt heavier. I asked a more ridiculous question because that's who I am. Who are you? It answered a name that wasn't Hollingsworth. It said my surname, the way my mother said it when I was in trouble. Then it said after a beat, as if confiding, we try on names like coats. Yours fits. Not yet. Imogen arrived to find me pale and pretending to be casual. You look like you need sugar, she said, and handed me a chocolate croissant she'd already bitten. I told her the short version. I think something whispered to me from a sealed door and used my name. Echo trick, she said. But her voice didn't have judgment in it, just curiosity. Let's test. We did the rational things. She stood at different angles and spoke, and I stood at the door and listened. We heard faint returns, ours, but softer, as though laid back on the air like tissue. I asked boring, straight questions out loud and heard nothing, which made me feel both foolish and relieved. Then Imogen, who has a sense of drama I pretend to hate but lean on, leaned toward the door and said, Is there anyone in there? The answer came so fast we both staggered. Not yet, it said, and this time Imogen heard it. She went very still. You heard that? I asked. Yes, she said. Then to the door, very gently. Who are you? The voice didn't say my surname this time. It said hers. It said it twice, once the way we say it and once with the vowel stretched old as if from a mouth that remembers different English. Imogen took my wrist. We're going, she said. We did, in that quick walk that isn't quite a run. We told Keats. He listened without moving his face. When we were done, he exhaled through his nose and said, There are reasons we close at dusk. I asked him directly if the Hollingsworth vault was accessible. He said no, sealed in 1883, never re-entered. And the paperwork would bear that out if the paperwork hadn't been eaten by a flood in 57. He would not remove the plaster. People think old things are like museums, he said. They're not. They remember. We leave some doors shut because we like sleeping. He locked the keys away with a softness that felt like a warning. Imogen squeezed my arm and went home. I sat in the archive room pretending to look up stone decay rates and listening to my own recorder in my lap with headphones on. There were long sections of nothing, just the tick of the device. Then, faint as a thought, my voice asking, What is your inscription? And the reply close and clear, You write the line. I scrubbed back and forth to be sure I wasn't willing it. It was there. On the recording, when Imogen asked if anyone was in there, I heard, not yet, like before. And underneath it, if I turned the volume up, something like a second voice murmuring the same words a beat behind, as if repeating itself through a longer corridor. If I were sensible, the story would end with me resigning the job and buying Leah dinner. Instead, I let the arrangements of my life carry me into evening at the site. Keats asked me to lock the small side gate on the west before going. I said yes automatically. The light fell fast in that greenway London has where everything turns the same soft blue. I did the gate, came back past the circle, and stopped because the air had that feeling of being less alone than you think. Another caretaker, a younger, one I'd met twice named Arif, was finishing his rounds. You're the historian, he said. Heading out? Yes, I lied. We were both brittle with polite end-of-day niceness. He touched the brim of his cap and went his way. I stood there like a fool and told myself to leave. Then I heard my sister's voice from behind the Hollingsworth door. Clear, warm. Hey, it said. Hey, nickname. It's fine. Come help me. I turned fast enough to make my neck click. It was Leah's voice. Not sort of like. Her voice. The exact shape of it when she answers the phone with her mouth full of pastry. She doesn't come up to Highgate. She was working a late shift that night because of a big order. I knew that because she'd texted. I stared at the door until my eyes prickled. Leah? I said, hating myself. Nothing. It's a trick, I said aloud to the air, to my own shaking hands. Then not Leah, but my mother's voice, dead 12 years, said my name the way she did when I was small and muddy. I stepped up the 2 stairs without meaning to. I put my palm to the iron. It was cold enough to ache. From inside, no, from behind the iron, but not from within a room exactly, there came a slow breath like someone had leaned to the keyhole and sighed. The plaster in the hole was cracked into a spider web. For a stupid second, I thought about picking it out with my keys. I did not move. I'm grateful for that in a way I can't explain. Arif's radio crackled somewhere out of sight. A fox screamed. In the trees with that human cry foxes have that ruins your backbone. I stepped back. The voice that had used Leah, that had used my mother, spoke again in the first tone. The not quite voice. The one that sounds older than the place itself. Not yet, it said. We are not done writing. I left then, not with a run. Running in places like that feels like consenting to panic, but with a steady walk that tried to mimic the gait of a confident person. On the path I passed a young couple holding hands in that doubled way that says they're sharing a single sleeve. The girl said softly, "Did you hear singing?" The boy shook his head and kissed her hair, and I felt a cold anger at the place for being so beautiful while doing whatever it was doing to me. I dreamed bad dreams that night, but not the dramatic kind. Paperwork dreams, biro that won't write, doors that look like cupboards in houses you no longer live in. I woke at 3 to a sound like someone speaking in the flat hallway outside my door. A male voice murmuring words too softly to catch. I lay there and counted heartbeats and tried the thing where you hold your breath so you can tell if it's your own blood you're hearing. The voice went quiet. A minute later, my phone flickered to life. Some glitch, some ghost of charge, and lit the room with the kind of light that makes you think of fish. No notifications. I sat up. The flat was the flat. The radiator clicked. Somewhere downstairs a drunk laughed and coughed. I fell asleep with my shoes on. I told Leah everything the next day and watched her toggle between, "You're winding me," up, "You're not well, and I believe you because I have always believed you first." She came with me to Highgate. She's not easily spooked, and she has a way of being quiet that feels like a form of protection. The staff know me well enough now that nobody fussed when I said she was with me. We stood in front of Hollingsworth at noon when the day is big and polite. Leah nodded like greeting a neighbor and said into the old iron, "If you took my voice, you give it back." There was no answer. We waited. She held my hand the way she did when we took the bus home after school, 2 kids pressed into a corner seat. After 5 minutes, she said, "It doesn't get to have me." She meant her voice, her shape in the world. She meant not to leave anything important on someone else's doorstep. She kissed the cold door and laughed because it was too cold, and pulled me away to see the cedar properly. I wanted to love her fearless for 30 minutes like medicine. It worked for 28. We found the Hollingsworth mention later that afternoon, in a swelling black-bound ledger mislabeled for another family. It had only a line, "Vault sealed, for November 1883. No readmission. See note in main register." The main register had been damaged in the flood Keats mentioned, but a corner survived. A brown finger of paper where someone had written an apology in a hand so precise it felt like a priest speaking. The Hollingsworth child should not have been left. That was all. The rest tore away decades ago. "Left," Leah said, and the word brought with it 1,000 stupid ideas and an equal number of ordinary, awful ones. We asked Keats if the 2 lines meant anything beyond the obvious. He studied the torn register like a doctor reading a bad scan and finally said, "It means we don't open that one, and you stop talking to it." He wasn't angry. He was tired. There are houses you don't knock at," he added, and that end of things softness came back into his voice. I would like to say I obeyed. I didn't. I kept my distance for 2 days, and then I did something that felt like it would either fix everything or make me someone I didn't recognize. I went in late, the way people go to churches after hours, because they want to be close to something and don't have the courage to say what. I had the key to the side gate still in my pocket. Keats had asked me to hold on to it for the week. It was raining in that misty way where you don't get drenched, but you feel the water in your eyes. I wore the jacket that learned the smell of stone. The cemetery at dusk isn't dangerous in the ordinary sense. It's deer and foxes and the occasional person with a cheap bottle and nowhere else to be. But it has that pressure, like standing in a lift between floors. The circle takes the last of the light and keeps a little for itself. I clicked on a torch and let the beam find the cedar and the ring of doors. I told myself one question, one answer, then home. I stood at Hollingsworth and said very clearly, "What are you?" The voice that came back was not the whisper I'd heard before, not quite. It was as if the whisper had learned to be brave. "We are what you taught us," it said. "We are what you wrote." I hate that sentence. It is still in my mouth. I said like a fool, "I wrote nothing." The voice did something like laughing, but slowly, like turning a page. "You write us whenever you look. You write us when you copy the names. You write us when you bring others and say, 'Listen, you will write the line.' Not yet." I stepped backward and my heel slipped on wet moss and I caught myself with my hand on the step. I swear to you, if I had fallen, I might have, I don't know, gone in? There's no in. The door's iron. The plaster is there, dusty and stubborn. But I felt it like you feel a drop in your stomach in a lift. The sense of going down when you remain exactly where you are. I pointed the torch at the join between door and stone, and the light bounced back too quickly like it had found a surface too close. The whisper said my nickname again, but wrong, as if practiced and still imperfect. Then another voice joined it, thinner and higher, and said, like a child repeating a lesson, "Insure and certain, insure and certain." I threw the torch beam away and it shook across the circle and lit up a fox's eyes like green buttons. I turned it off and stood in the dark because sometimes darkness tells less truth than light. There were footsteps on the path. Not dramatic. Normal caretaker footsteps. RF appeared at the lip of the circle and said my name. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. But in that tone that means we're not going to make a big thing of it. He looked at my face and his softened. "All right." I nodded too fast. "Come on," he said. The voice behind the door didn't speak. The silence did. It felt like handwriting being considered. I went up the steps and past a reef, and when we reached the top he looked back down without meaning to. Like the way you glance at a bed you've just made. "Do you hear that?" he asked. His radio hissed, a fox barked, the city murmured as always. "Hear what?" I said, which is a lie I regret. He shook himself, the way people do after a thought they don't want to keep, and walked me out through the little gate and locked it with a clack that echoed. He didn't ask why I'd gone in. He didn't have to. The recordings from that day are wrong. Not just corrupted, wrong. On my device I hear my question, "What are you?" And I hear my breath before the answer. And then I hear my own voice answering in a tone I never use and saying, "We are what you wrote." I never said that. I know I didn't because I could not have made my voice sound like that small, satisfied cruelty. I played it for Imogen and she went gray the way people go when a thing leaps species in their head from idea to event. She said, "Delete it." I said, "No, I did not delete it. I don't listen to it either. Not if I can help it. It sits on the card like a mass. Sometimes at night I feel as if it has weight on the shelf. To distract myself, I keep promising to make a proper transcript. I take out my notebook to start, and there is always the same line written in my own hand that I don't remember putting there. "In sure and certain hope." As if my wrist wants to finish a job my mind doesn't. This is the part where I'm supposed to give you a person to blame or a coincidence that neatly explains everything away. I can't. The most I can offer is a theory not even rigorous enough to call that. Highgate is a palimpsest. All old places are. Layers over layers, names over names, the present skimming the past and stealing a little ink as it goes. We go into those places with our stories and we lay them down like tracing paper. Sometimes the place lays its old sheet over ours and the lines line up. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes what we look at looks back, not out of cruelty but out of the same curiosity we bring. Sometimes we write more than we know we're writing, and sometimes there is something that waits for the line to be complete. Not yet, not yet, not yet. I still go to Highgate, not as often and not at dusk. I do honest work. I try not to talk to doors. When I must pass the circle, I do it the way you pass a neighbor you've argued with head high and heart thudding, and a small wave you pretend is for the cat. The Hollingsworth vault is as it was. The plaster sits in the keyhole like old icing. The ivy makes modest progress. Tourists ask after famous names I've never met and leave disappointed and briefly loving. The foxes thrive. Keats nods and keeps his keys. Arif shuffles papers and pretends not to see me hesitate. My sister makes me soup more often than a person requires. Imogen refuses to walk the circle with me, and instead stands at the cemetery's edge in the good light and takes pictures of the city's roofline and says things like, "Look, that sky. That sky's amazing," because that is what artists do when they choose to live on purpose. 2 weeks ago, someone slid a photocopy under my flat door in the night. There was no note. It was an old page from a register, scaled smaller, the edges of the copy bowed. It read in faded ink, vault sealed, 4th November 1883, no readmission. Hollingsworth child returned to family custody. Ledger amended, my surname, historian admitted for documentation, final closure by order of, and the rest cut off. There is no world in which my name should be on a document from that year. I stared until the paper looked like a portrait that wanted to tell you a joke and couldn't. I did not tell Leah. I put the copy in a drawer and then I took it out again and tore it in half and put the halves in different bins 8 streets apart. I am not foolish enough to believe that matters, but I am not brave enough to do nothing. I can hear someone in the hall as I write this, speaking too softly for words and yet perfectly clear. It has that pantry cold sound, like stone, like distance. The voice has learned my room's acoustics. It knows where the radiator ticks. It breathes when the elevator in the next building rises. When I pause, it fills the pause. It uses my name the way my mother did when she wanted me to stop drawing and come to dinner. It is polite. It is very patient. It says every few minutes, as if reminding me of something we agreed to do together. Not yet. I've started answering it by saying, "I'm writing." And it answers in that careful, pleased way, "Yes, you write the line." I don't know what line it means. I don't want to know. I'll post this now because it feels like the only kind of closure I get to choose. I'll leave the rest unwritten. I'll put my pen down and turn off the light and sit very quietly while the hall breathes and the city speaks, and something that isn't quite a voice hovers by a door I will not open and waits for me to say at last whatever it thinks comes next. Not yet. I never planned to type this out, but I can't keep carrying it alone and pretending it's just a good story I tell to friends after a couple of drinks. I used to work nights at Per-Lachaise, the big cemetery in the 20th, the one tourists treat like a museum. I took the job because I thought it would be quiet. I was wrong about the quiet part, and I was dead wrong about the nights. My name is Laurent. If you look closely at a certain grave along Division 76, on the left of a sloping cobbled path where the cypresses knot together, and the yellow city glow falls in stripes, you'll see scratch marks that used to be a date. That date was always one day ahead of whatever day I stood there, and beneath the date it kept saying my name. I wasn't always the night person. I did day shifts for a while, opening the Gambetta entrance, pointing tourists toward Jim Morrison's spot or Edith Piaf's, telling people to keep their dogs on the leash and their wine outside. After my landlord put my rent up, I offered to take nights for the extra pay. Nights meant fewer tourists, fewer arguments. "The dead won't bother you," my supervisor Michel said. He had a laugh that died in his throat like a cough.
"It's the living you've got to watch."
Lovers, thieves, the odd drunk. He handed me a ring of keys the size of a fist and a square metal lantern with a battery that hummed when you turned it on. He called me the Lantern Keeper, and we both laughed because it sounded like a fairy tale. He told me the first rule was not to nap in the maintenance office, even if the small heater wheezed and the chair hugged the back of your head like a pillow. "Walk always," he said. "The patrol schedule is your lullaby." It was a joke, but not really. The schedule is a list of divisions and turns. You change direction. You don't get predictable. My first few nights were uneventful in the way only a city can be uneventful. Faint sirens, muffled bass from a party on Boulevard de Ménilmontant, motor scooters coughing in the distance, foxes red-eyed in the beam of my lantern, slipping like smoke over the walls. The cemetery at night is a different shape. The way the light catches the marble, the way the names jump out or disappear, the way some mausoleums seem to breathe because their metal doors move with temperature. I developed small habits. I would tap the lock on the ossuary door each time, just to feel something solid under my glove. I would nudge a loose flower pot back toward a safer angle. I knew which trees dumped water even after the rain was over. I knew which cobbles would roll your ankle if you landed on them sleepy. By the end of a week, I had a mental map of where my thoughts got strange and where they smoothed out. Strange on the narrow paths under leaning angels. Smooth by the modern granite rows where the names are laser clean and unromantic. It was around 3 in the morning when I saw the first carving. It wasn't just graffiti. It was carved into an old limestone headstone that had already gone soft with age. The letters were shallow but neat, done with a steady hand, Laurent B, and under it a date. It was the 13th on my phone. The stone said the 14th. My last name begins with B. And I stared at that letter for a long time, telling myself I was reading what I expected to see. Lots of Lawrence in Paris, right? But that initial felt like a finger jabbed into my chest. I checked the stone carefully. It belonged to someone else entirely. From the 1910s, a family name I won't mention because this isn't the kind of story where you chase it like a scavenger hunt. I took a photo. I breathed out a little cloud and told myself I'd report it at the end of my shift. At sunrise, the city thinned itself back into streets. A woman walking a tiny dog peered through the bars at me because I was still inside while the day guards came to unlock the gates. I showed Michel the photo. He squinted at it and then squinted at me like I was the one who'd carved it. "Stupid kids," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "We'll make a note." He had me fill out an incident form, date, time, location. I went home past the bakery on Rue des Rondeaux and told myself it would be gone by later, the way weird things slide off memory. I didn't tell Claire, my ex, though I still talk to her sometimes. I didn't want to give her another reason to say, "You're always choosing the strange version of life, aren't you?" But that night when I woke for work, the photo lit up my dark room again. The date under my name was today. On my second night, the carving wasn't there anymore. Or rather, that stone was clean again. Old clean, weather clean, like nothing new had happened to it in decades. I held my lantern close and felt the dust with my glove. Undisturbed. For a minute, I decided I'd misremembered which grave it had been. That lasted until I made a turn near Division 10, and the beam picked out my name on a different stone. Same neat hand, same 2 shallow cuts, same not quite straight alignment, as if whoever was doing it had practiced just enough to land this close to perfect. Under it, tomorrow's date. I didn't take a photo this time. I stood with my lantern off and listened to my own breathing echo in the metal of a nearby gate. I thought I heard, very faintly, a tapping somewhere, like a ring knocking gently against glass, then nothing. Then the city's background hum returned all at once, like when a train exits a tunnel and your ears pop. I kept my patrol schedule tighter after that. I doubled back, changed order, cut across. You can't watch every grave. That's the joke of a place that big. You think you know it, but then a path you swore bent right will bend left, or the small iron fence you're sure had 3 spears now has 5. Around 4, a pair of lovers squeezed in through a side gate and startled when my lantern found them. The girl laughed and then looked sorry. The boy was quick to smile, hands up, apologetic. I took both their student IDs, wrote their names on a scrap of paper, and sent them back toward the gate with a warning. "You could hurt yourself in here at night," I said. "It isn't what you think." I didn't mean ghosts. I meant the way your mind loses its shape if you stand too long in certain corners and forget there's a world on the other side of the wall. On the 3rd morning after the 2nd carving, I met an older groundskeeper named Armand near the maintenance shed. He smoked thin cigarettes that smelled of cloves and old paper. He worked days, but he'd shown up early to collect a metal rake he liked better than the others. "You're the new lantern," he said in a way that made the job sound older than either of us. "Michelle says you walk well." "No falling asleep," I said, something half proud, half wary. He looked at me as if I had spinach in my teeth and blew smoke out the corner of his mouth. "If you see a name that isn't on a map, don't say it out loud," he said. "There are names that aren't your business." He wasn't talking about celebrity graves. I asked him what he meant, and he lifted one shoulder. "Sometimes the stone remembers who will keep it company," he said, like a line from a bad poem. Then he changed the subject to football and left. I did tell Claire. I don't know why I called her. Maybe because she knew the part of me that keeps inventory of odd things. We had broken up because of that part. I once kept a notebook of odd keys I found on the street, sketched, labeled, imagined their locks, and she said it wasn't the hobby that bothered her. It was the way I fed it, like I wanted it to be a bigger thing. When I told her about the carvings, there was a pause long enough for me to count the seconds in my head and stop at 7. "So you think someone's threatening you?" she asked finally. "Or is it like a mistake of attention?" She teaches art to teenagers and talks like that when she's trying to be careful with a nervous kid. I said I didn't know. "Maybe a prank," I said. "Maybe someone saw my ID and thought it would be funny." She sighed a little. "Don't make it a project, Laurent," she said. Sleep. That would be a good project. The fourth night, my name appeared on 3 stones. 2 were near each other, almost as if someone had rehearsed on one and landed it on the other, though both were too precise to be a rehearsal. The third was deeper in, near the small columbarium that collects the names of people who chose to be heat and ash. Same hand, same date ahead of mine. I radioed the small handset we carry. There's a day guard who does a late check-in sometimes because of break-ins, and he answered with static in his voice. "You want us to send the police?" he asked. I looked at my lantern circle on the ground and the way the gravel glittered like sugar under it. "Not yet," I said. "I'll file, and if it happens again, we will." He said okay in a way that meant I'd already lost points. It kept happening. Every night, at least one fresh carving with my name and tomorrow's date. They were never on the same grave twice. Some were faint, barely there, like a whisper in stone you imagined you didn't hear. Some were bold, as if the carver had found a sharper tool. I took photos when I remembered or when it didn't feel like a dare. And when I showed Michel, he rubbed his eye with the base of his palm. "We'll get a patrol car to swing by," he said. We did. 2 officers walked with me one night. The older one, Sergeant Lefebvre, had the kind of tired that comes from years of being lied to. And the younger one, Bouchard, had the kind of alertness that comes from wanting to impress the older one. They made jokes at first, gentle enough, but when we found a fresh carving near Division 28, the jokes went away. "Your name," Bouchard said softly. He glanced at me to make sure I was seeing what he saw. Lefebvre knelt, touched the letters, then stood with a grunt. "Looks like a small chisel," he said, as if he'd taken a class in this somewhere. He clicked his tongue and surveyed the path with the kind of patience most people give to their own kitchens. "We'll make a report," he said. "Check the cameras on the perimeter. And you," he looked at me not unkindly, "you should not walk alone for a bit." I reminded him that was my job. He nodded once. "Then walk like you're not alone." Word got around quietly among the staff. A woman in the office named Nadia slipped me a thermos of strong coffee on my way out one night and said, "Don't pick up anything you didn't drop." She meant notes, trinkets, coins left on graves. People leave strange offerings: metro tickets, guitar picks for Morrison, lipstick on glass for someone they never met. I didn't pick up anything that wasn't keys or my lantern, but after she said it, the rule felt more like law. I don't want to paint myself as more courageous than I am. I got jumpy. I would hear a small rock skitter down a slope and freeze until my heart calmed. I started saying bonjour softly under my breath when the wind moved through the cedars like a coat pulled against your shoulders. It helped to greet the air. It made the empty feel less like a thing that would move only when I wasn't looking. Around this time, a couple of neighbors who live across from the Philippe Auguste entrance stopped me on my way in one evening. They'd seen me enough to recognize the lantern and the way I walk, head forward like I'm reading the ground. "Do you do tours?" the woman asked with a hopeful, curious tilt. I told her no, not at night. "Shame," the man said, and then, looking at my face, he added, "You sleep?" I smiled and said, "Sometimes," and his smile dropped like a stone. "You should," he said. "Not here. I tried to leave Paris for a night." Claire offered her couch in Montreuil because she thought a change of air would break the spell. "It's not a spell," I said. "It's vandalism." But when she hugged me at the door, she smelled like clean soap and old books, and I tried to believe in her version. We watched a late movie with the sound too low, and she fell asleep halfway through. I lay there and listened to the building move. The elevator coughed once, a neighbor laughed. I drifted and woke at 3, knowing absolutely and completely that my name was being carved somewhere without me. It felt like missing a train I had waited for months to catch. I got up quietly, left a note, and went back to the cemetery early. I remember the night guard looking at me through the glass of the maintenance office like, You look at someone who's returned to a bad habit. I remember the white of his coffee cup and the heat on my eyelids when I stood too close to the radiator. The climax you're waiting for isn't a scream or a shadow running at me with a knife. If it had been that, I could have wrapped it in a clean fear and handed it to the police and said, "Here, do your job." It was this instead. Near dawn, a fog slid in from nowhere. The way fog does when the city exhales. My lantern lit the air itself more than anything around me. Sound got weird, as if the cemetery were underwater and I was hearing footsteps from the bottom of a pool. I stopped walking without meaning to, and in the lantern's weak circle I saw stone dust floating like breath you could see. Not a lot, just enough to make the light look tired. I thought of construction dust in my father's old car, how it settled on the dashboard and made it gray. Then I heard the tap, tap, tap of metal on stone. It wasn't loud. It was precise, like someone fixing a tiny thing with great care. The sound came from my left. I turned and the fog turned with me. There was a shape crouched at a grave just off the path. Not black, not white, shape color like a person when you remember them from before you knew their name. My lantern caught the arc of an elbow and the stillness of a back that looked familiar, because all humans have the same map under coats and jackets. I said bonsoir because that's what I say when I'm about to ask someone to leave. The shape kept working. Tap, tap, tap. I stepped closer on that quietly treacherous gravel and the sound stopped. The shape didn't turn. It didn't do anything. It just held itself like a photograph. "Hey," I said, my voice mixing with the fog. "You can't be here." The shape stood slow, not a threat, just the way someone stands when their knees complain. It set the tool down on top of the grave and then, not hurried, not careful, just inevitable, it moved out of my lantern's circle. I followed the sound of it. A whisper of fabric, the bare scrape of a shoe, and the fog closed like a curtain on a stage you hadn't realized was a stage. I swung the light wider and it hit nothing. Not trees, not stone, not a person's face. I listened hard enough to hurt and heard only the city waiting outside the walls. The tool on the grave was a small chisel, the kind you could buy in a hardware store. It was warm in my gloved hand and left a powder of limestone that made me want to lick my finger and taste chalk. A stupid, reflexive thought. I kept the lantern trained on the letters. Laurent B, the date was today. I'd never seen it be the same day before. The edges were crisp. The dust on the ground was my proof. I touched my name and my glove came away white. Around then I noticed the stone wasn't like the others. It was new, startlingly clean in a place where everything is a little tired. And there was no other name on it. No birth date, no epitaph, just mine. My chest tightened, not like panic. More like a belt cinched one hole tighter than comfortable. I looked around for the shape and saw only the fog layering itself between me and everything else, like it was building a room made of air and asking me to stand in it. I radioed in a voice I didn't recognize. The day guard's reply crackled and then warped as if we were speaking through a plastic bottle. He said he was coming with Michelle. I stood there with my name and the little chisel and the humiliation of feeling caught by something that used my own letters as a trap. When they arrived, the fog had thinned. Misha looked at the stone, then at me, then at the tool. He swore softly, a prayer without a god attached. "Who did this?" he asked. It wasn't really a question. The day guard, a man named Hugo who wears his uniform as if it's borrowed, took the chisel between two fingers and made a face. "You shouldn't be touching that," he said. "Fingerprints." I lifted my glove and he shrugged. "We call the police," Michel said, and he did. Lefebvre and Bouchard came again, with a photographer who stepped with dancers' feet between the stones and made everything look like it had happened somewhere else, the way official photos do. They asked me to walk them through it. I did, and my words felt like a bad rehearsal. At one point I said, "The shape stood like it was used to standing," and hated myself for the sentence. Lefebvre rubbed his forehead and nodded slowly and then asked me all the questions that make up a ritual of reason. Had I argued with anyone? Had I seen anyone? Had I received anonymous messages? Did I owe anyone anything? Had I wanted to hurt myself? I said no, 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 rent and no. The last was an honest answer. I wasn't afraid of harming myself. I was afraid of being matched to a place like a key to a lock. They set a small camera inside the wall near the Gambetta entrance after that, aimed along the path where the fog had become a room for me. It was motion triggered. We looked at a bit of footage the following afternoon. It caught cats, a fox, two teenagers taking photos with a flash that made my eyes ache on the screen, and the thin blur of me passing. It caught the fog rolling in like a slow thought. It did not catch a shape or a person or my name being carved. The stone was old in that footage, and then the stone was new, like a cut to a fresh scene with no actor in between. I didn't quit. I should have. Why didn't I? Because leaving would have been an answer, and I didn't want to answer a question I hadn't asked. Because the money felt like something I could count while the rest of it was counting me. Because the people on day shift started treating me like a rare animal, and I felt important and small in the same breath. Because Armand looked at me one morning in a way that wasn't unfriendly and said, "You're stubborn," as if that were a diagnosis. A week after the fog, Claire came to see me at the gate at dusk. She wore a scarf the color of a robin's egg and bit her bottom lip when she was thinking of how to be kind. "You don't look good," she said, and I said, "I don't sleep much." She asked to walk with me for a little while, just at the beginning, and I told her she couldn't because of the rules, and because I suddenly wanted her to stay outside the story. She shook her head and laughed in a small, sad way. "You've living inside parentheses," she said, "and you think they protect you." We stood there with our breath mixing in the cool, and then she kissed my cheek in a way that rehearsed goodbye without committing to it. "Text me when you're done," she said. I said I would, and I did. The last night before I started writing this, my name appeared on a slate that was flaking at the corners. The date beneath it was tomorrow, and then I looked at the grave next to it, and on that one my name was there too. And that date was the day after tomorrow. I walked the path and counted 10 stones in a row that had my name, each with a date further away by 1 day. 10 days lined up like people waiting at a pharmacy. I stood in the middle of the path with my lantern off and let my eyes adjust. The city's sodium glow wove through the branches and painted everything in half light. I listened and heard nothing except my own small sounds. I took a slow breath and felt the name of the cemetery like a cord in my chest. Per-Lachaise. Father, the chair, the armchair. The chair where you sit and wait for the person you've become to catch up. I'm not saying anything spectacular happened after that. I'm saying I spent the rest of my shift walking where the dates stretched forward into a future that felt like someone else's calendar. I'm saying I watched the eastern sky get less black and more gray, and then like wet paper, and then like yourself in a mirror you haven't looked at in a while. I'm saying when the day guards came, I told Michel I wanted to take a few days off. And he looked at me with relief and said, "Good." I walked home past the bakery where a man was loading baguettes into a basket. The smell warm and real, and I told myself I'd sleep until I woke up without counting the hours. I did sleep, but not long. I woke with a small rock of certainty in my gut. The stone with today's date would be clean now. Old clean, weather clean, and somewhere else there would be a new one with my name and a date I don't want to write. This isn't a confession or a warning. I'm not telling you not to visit the cemetery or that you'll see what I saw. I'm not selling you a ghost. I am saying that every morning something was freshly made and then unmade. And each time I stood where my name had been, that place felt like a location on a map that only I carried. I don't know who or what carved the letters. I don't know why the camera didn't see. I don't know why the fog made a room around me. I don't know whether saying bonjour into the moving air ever reached anything. I have the chisel. It sits on my kitchen table, and sometimes when the apartment is very quiet, I hear it shift like metal cooling. I could give it to the police and cross a thing off a list. I haven't, because I don't think that would end it. I think objects that have been used for a purpose retain a little of that purpose, and I don't want to pass that weight to anyone else. Tonight I should be sleeping. Instead, I'm writing this because it's easier to confess to strangers than to look Claire in the eye and say I'm going back. I won't take nights for a while, I told Michel, but I can't leave altogether. I said the words and felt them settle in my mouth like stones. I tell myself I'm going back to reshelve chairs and lock gates and point tourists toward names that belong to other people. That's all. But in the pocket of the jacket I'll wear, there is a dust of limestone that won't brush off. And before I left work this morning, Michel said, "Tomorrow?" And I said, like an idiot, "We'll see." If you go to Per-Lachaise and you pass a lantern that doesn't hum quite the way it should, and you hear someone tapping, not loud, not menacing, just careful, you don't have to stop. Most people don't. But if you do, don't say my name out loud. Let the fog do its polite work of closing around you until you remember what you came there for. And if for some reason you notice a date carved shallowly under a name you think you recognize, do me a kindness and keep walking. Don't point. Don't take a photo. Don't turn the lantern off to see if the dark feels fairer. I tell myself that names only have the power you give them, but that's a liar's comfort. Some places remember for us. Some places keep the list. And sometimes when the morning comes, the list is one day longer, and the person it's for can feel the dust still on their hands even after they've washed them twice. I'm going in tonight to make rounds I say are for other reasons. The chisel is on the table. The battery in the lantern is new. The date on the stone I'm thinking of is tomorrow. It will be there whether I look or not. The city is full of chairs, and someone has to sit in this one until the next person comes. If you don't believe me, that's fine. I'm not completely sure I believe myself. It's just that when I look at my sleeve right now, there's a pale smear I can't explain. And when I lift my hand to my face, the tips of my fingers smell like rain on chalk. I know this is going to sound like a dumb tourist mistake, but I need to get it out of my head before it gets worse. I was in Edinburgh for 3 nights in late September. The kind of trip where you tell yourself you're going to take foggy photos of stone closes and eat your weight in pies. Not go poking around places with iron gates and warnings about private ground. I'd booked a bunk in a small hostel off Candlemaker Row, the one with the wooden stag over the door and a front desk that sells instant noodles and padlocks. My friend Maya met me there from Glasgow. She's the sort who will read every placard in a museum and then fact-check the placard on her phone. I'm the sort who brings a lightweight tripod and takes long exposures of alleyways at 2 in the morning. The first afternoon we did the usual loop, the Royal Mile, down to Grassmarket, up past the statue of Greyfriars Bobby. The dog already looked wet, even though it wasn't raining. The sky was that pearl grey Scotland does like it's a talent. We ended up in Greyfriars Kirkyard because you can't not. The church stands squat and tired, and the stones lean with the kind of permanence that makes you feel temporary. Tourists moved like slow fish around us, reading names. Somewhere a car alarm hiccuped and stopped. A guide with a green scarf was gathering a ghost tour near the gates. She had that storyteller's voice even when she said, "Right, form up please." The A clipped, the smile too practiced to be fake. "Morag," she said when I asked her name. "You're welcome to join later, but the last stop is shut just now." The last stop was the Covenanters' prison, which I only knew because I'd read about it that morning, and because there was a sign on its gate. Private. By order of the city of Edinburgh. The padlock on the gate didn't look new. It looked like it had always been there. If you don't know the history, it's basically this. A lot of people were held there in the late 1600s under awful conditions, and it never entirely settled. That's the polite version. The impolite version is the one Morag hinted at between points of interest, that there's something in the air back there near Mackenzie's tomb that likes attention and sometimes takes more than it's given. We took the tour anyway. It was the kind with jokes to break the tension. Morag calling the Kirkyard Edinburgh's most reliable landlord, because it never kicks anyone out. But once she led us toward the far corner, the jokes ran out. The crowd thinned the deeper we went. A Japanese couple stayed close, whispering, holding hands. A student in a varsity jacket drifted to the back with the other guy who looked like he'd lost his friends to a pub. Maya walked a step ahead of me, looking more curious than nervous. The light did a weird thing out there. It wasn't yet sunset, but the pathway under the trees dimmed like the contrast had been turned down. Morag stopped at the gate. "We end here, ladies and gents," she said, lifting her scarf over her mouth when the wind cut across. "The prison ground is closed for a reason, and I like my job." She told the story of the Black Mausoleum in a way that felt responsible and still got you listening hard. Names, dates, a caretaker knocked unconscious some years ago, a string of people fainting, inexplicable bruises. I've heard enough embellished tours to tell when someone is enjoying their own voice. She wasn't. When a small boy coughed too hard, she flinched. She wrapped up quick and ushered us back, giving the gate a tap with her knuckle as if to say, "Good night" to something you don't want to turn your back on without a word. It was full dark by the time we drifted across the street to a noodle place. Maya scrolled the photos she'd taken, then mine, then a website with the words Mackenzie Poltergeist in bold, then rolled her eyes at me. "We are not going back there," she said. "We don't even have to say it. We are not going back there." The problem is my brain has a latch that flips when someone says, "not," It catches and holds. I slept badly in the top bunk, listening to the hostel's plumbing hiss and settle. At around 1:30, I gave up. The streets outside were quiet enough that my footsteps sounded like someone else's. Edinburgh does that to sound, amplifies it, then swallows it when you turn the corner. I had my camera slung, my cheap tripod folded under my arm, and a head full of excuses. Just the churchyard, I told myself. Through the gates, a couple of long exposures, then back. I didn't even bring the room key because Maya had it, and I didn't want to wake the desk guy. I figured I'd buzz when I returned. I passed the statue of Bobby. Someone had polished his nose again, and turned into the kirkyard. It is not closed at night, which is either merciful or unwise. My breath showed in pale puffs. I set up near the church to get the sense of the stones as silhouettes, the way they made the city's lights look like something far away underwater. My camera's intervalometer ticked a tiny sound. Frames crawled into the card. I moved slowly, careful with where I put my feet. Once a gull screamed like a thing being pulled through metal and shut up. Somewhere farther off, a door slammed. I didn't think I was going to walk all the way to the back. I didn't decide it exactly. It felt like drifting along a current you only notice when you try to swim. I kept telling myself that the prison gate would be shut and that would be end of it. The fact of the padlock would be like a grown-up in the room. When the path narrowed and dipped a little, I stopped and told myself I'd take a final shot from here and turn around. That's when I heard the click. It was a small sound, not the heavy clunk of a padlock opening, more like a fingernail on metal. Then the faintest scrape. I stood there trying to convince myself it was a fox. The air around me had that drained feeling, colder not in temperature but in spirit. I know that sounds dramatic. It felt like winter's rehearsal. The gate was another 30 paces along. I could see the faint shape of it, the way iron picks up every little bit of stray light and pretends to glow. I aimed the camera instead, zoomed, focused manually because the autofocus hunted and failed. The padlock was there in place, dull. I took a shot. My shutter smacked the quiet like a door. Then something brushed the back of my jacket at shoulder height. I spun. No one. My brain flipped through reasonable options like cards, a twig, my bag strap shifting, my imagination catching up to my heartbeat. I crouched and pretended I had needed to adjust my tripod anyway. When I stood again, the gate the tiniest degree less shut than it had been. Or I had stepped right and my angle changed. That's what I told myself. Nope, I said out loud, then laughed at the word leaving my mouth like that. I took another shot and turned to go. The path behind me looked unfamiliar for a second, as if the dark had plumped up and shifted its weight. My knees prickled the way they do when you get a sudden fever. A car horn from the direction of the bridge sounded thin as a toy. Then my phone buzzed so hard it almost leapt out of my pocket. I had no service back there, I shouldn't have. But a notification lit the screen. Maya, where are you? Why did you just send me a photo? I hadn't. I checked my gallery. There was no outgoing, anything. The message had gone without me. My camera beeped, the kind of cheap digital chirp you can't change. The intervalometer had somehow turned itself on and set to a 10-second timer. That's not even a mode I'd used that day. The red LED winked a steady beat. I slapped at buttons and it ignored me like a cat. When the shutter went, the sound felt like a tap on the gate. I decided, sensibly finally, to go. I folded the tripod, slung the camera, turned, and almost walked into a man. The first credible shape of another person I'd seen that hour, and he was right there, 2 steps off the path between stones. He wore a long, dark coat and a hat with a brim, like he dressed for any century but this one. His face was shadowed by the hat and the angle of the light behind him, but I could see his mouth. Closed, unsmiling, too calm for someone who just startled me in a graveyard. Sorry, I said automatically, hands up. Didn't see you. He didn't move. All the tiny hairs along my arms lifted like I was a tuning fork. It's closed in there, I said, because you say things when you have to fill silence or drown it. My voice went flat in the wide space. He raised his right hand and pointed, Not at the gate, but at my camera. It made another small, obedient beep and readied itself for another 10-second exposure. The man lowered his hand, and I heard the padlock again. Not opening, not closing, just shifting its position like a muscle. If you'd shoved me and told me to run, I would've. But you know how sometimes you're almost outside yourself, watching your own foolishness in real time? I placed the tripod at the edge of the path facing the gate and framed it so that the iron filled the lower third. One. More, I said for no one's benefit, and pressed the shutter. 10 seconds. I could walk away. I could do anything else. On 5, the man had not moved. On 2, my knees turned warm. On 1, I couldn't feel the weight of the camera's strap across my shoulder anymore. The photo clicked. I was suddenly sweating despite the cold. I removed the camera, checked the screen. Black and gray and grain. The timestamp said what it should. The numbers made sense. It looked like a long exposure of a closed gate and stone beyond. I breathed, finally said, "Okay," and stepped back to lift the tripod. The man was gone. No footstep, no coat's hem brushing stone, just not there. I backed away the way you do from a sleeping dog you've stepped over to avoid waking it. The path behind me was the path again. I walked too fast and pretended it was the hill. Outside the kirkyard, the traffic and the fried food smell felt aggressively normal. I looked back once. From that distance, the gate simply existed. Unquestionable. I sent Maya a message. "Back in 10. She wrote back immediately. "Watch your step." I almost sent a question mark, but didn't want to keep my phone out. At the hostel, the desk guy, Yuan, according to his name tag and his half-eaten sandwich, looked up and said, "You didn't take any souvenirs, right? We're not allowed to make that joke anymore after last year." He laughed alone and buzzed me in. Maya was awake in her lower bunk, hair a wild halo. "You're an idiot," she said, but she didn't mean it cruelly. "Also, don't do that again. You sent me a picture." "Of what?" She turned the phone toward me. It was my email address in the sender line, and a photo attached, the thumbnail dark. She tapped it. It filled the screen. The composition was good. I'll say that like it excuses anything. The gate filled a third, just like I framed it. There was me, though, kneeling. I don't kneel. I can't remember doing it. In the photo, I was kneeling a step inside the threshold, my hands pressed together like I'd been told to pray and had tried to approximate it from memory. My head was bowed. My right knee was dark where the fabric had picked up damp from the ground. Beyond me, in the washed-out night, a darker oval of shadow marked earth that wasn't packed like the rest. If you stared long enough, you could convince yourself it had edges. A trench, maybe a little more than the length of a body would be, if you were measuring from the foot up, which I didn't do because I couldn't make myself. "No," I said. Maya pinch-zoomed. "That's your camera," she said. "On the ground to your left. You can see the strap." "I had it," I said, uselessly. "I had it." "You didn't send this, right?" "No." "Then who did?" We didn't sleep. We didn't talk much either. Maya tried to tell me that the timer must have tripped and I must have set the camera on the ground and then, what, knelt? She didn't finish that sentence. At 4, I got up and showered to warm my hands. When I pulled my jeans back on, the right knee felt damp. I turned the fabric inside out. The lining had a stain, not dramatic, just darker, and my fingers came away smelling like coins and dirt that hasn't seen air in a long time. I scrubbed them until the skin went slick and red. The next day, we did not go back. We did the castle instead. I took photos of tourists taking photos of cannons because it felt like a safe joke. Maya kept checking the time like she had a train to catch even though we had none. In the mid-afternoon, a police officer in a yellow jacket stood with 2 others at the end of a closed-off alley near the kirkyard. The tape fluttered. An older man with a groundskeeper's walk stood with them, talking half into his sleeve as if to himself and half into the chest of the officer, and neither of them seemed to be listening. We heard the words, vandalism and unauthorized entry, and, again, I felt my stomach drop like a lift. We cut down a different way and didn't talk about it until we were on a bench watching a busker play a saw like a violin. You need to delete that photo, Maya said. I tried, she added, and showed me the message. Couldn't delete file. When we got back to the hostel that night, we tried taking the SD card out of my camera and putting it in her laptop. Every folder opened except the one the midnight photos went into. When you clicked it, the computer froze and asked to restart. We tried the card in my camera again. The little preview window worked perfectly for every shot except the last two. When I hit the arrow to go from the gate to the kneeling one, the camera went dark like it had lost its battery. It hadn't. The battery was full. Ewan watched us from behind the desk, and you could tell he wanted to ask what we were working on, but also didn't want to be implicated in anything. You ever do the tours? He asked finally. Morag tells a good story. We did, Maya said. We're not going again. He nodded as if that was predictable, then said, If you see anything weird in your photos after, don't send it around. Makes it worse, they say. He smiled while he said it, but then he looked at the door behind us like he might prefer to lock it. We left the next morning. On the train to London, Maya watched the hills like they might rise and follow. We didn't speak much. I kept the camera bag zipped and my feet braced when the carriage rocked. The soil smell came and went, a hint only I seemed to catch. When I got home 2 days later, I set the camera on my desk and told myself I'd deal with it after sleep. I woke at 3, thirsty, walked to the kitchen in the dark, and stepped on something that rolled under my heel. Small, round, gritty. I flicked the light. Pebble. The kind you find pressed into old ground to keep mud down. There were 3 more near the door like someone had shaken a pocket out. My shoes were by the mat. I flipped them. Clean. I took the SD card to a camera store the next day and asked the guy behind the counter if they could recover a corrupt file. He slid the card into a reader and frowned at the monitor. You've got a folder that's not right, he said. Could be a bad sector. He tapped the desk with an ink-stained finger for a few seconds while lines of code scrolled. We can try cloning it. He hooked the card up to something that looked like a medical device for plastic and silicone. It hummed. We'll call you if we get anything, he said. He called me 3 hours later and said, we got one. I went back. He had the photo on a big monitor, huge enough that the pixels softened the edges a little. It didn't help. The kneeling me looked more like me when enlarged, like there was no getting around it. This wasn't a trick of light or someone wearing my coat. You could see the frayed thread on the cuff where I'd scraped it earlier that week. On the ground to my left, the camera, straps splayed like a tongue. 10 seconds to compose, 10 to kneel, 10 to... What? He cycled to the next image. Another of the gate. No me. It looked like the camera had fired again from somewhere to my right, but the angle was wrong for a tripod shot, lower and slightly tilted like whoever took it had held the camera against their chest. The timestamp between the kneeling and the empty gate was 8 seconds. Did you find this kind of thing in there before? I asked, because sometimes camera shops see everything. The guy didn't answer that. He turned the monitor off and said, You want this on a drive? Yes, I said, and then, no, and then, actually, can you print it? He looked at me like I'd asked for a framed headstone and then shrugged. Your call. I don't know why I wanted a physical copy. It felt like proof that memory wasn't getting fancy. He printed it 12 by 18, slid it into a paper envelope, and stapled it. He handed me back the SD card in a tiny plastic case. If I were you, he said, and then stopped. Just don't take it back there. I don't live there, I said. Doesn't matter, he said in a tone that pretended to be light. The envelope sits in my closet now. I haven't opened it since the day I brought it home. Sometimes, though, when the heat kicks on and the vents cough once, I think I hear the sound of something thin on metal. That small, not quite click. A week after I got back, Maya texted me a screenshot of her phone's health app. The step counter registered a short walk at 2:14 a. I didn't get up, she wrote, I swear. That same night at 2:21, my doorbell rang and then stopped. before my intercom could wake fully and show me a gray, grainy square of empty stoop. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, the motion alert's thumbnail showed nothing. The video itself showed nothing. The audio carried a soft drag, like someone pulling an iron chain lightly across a stone and then letting it go so it doesn't clink too loud. 2 days after that, I found dirt under my fingernails even though I'd done nothing dirt requires. The kind of soil that packs fine and dark, the kind that remembers. I sat in my bathroom and dug it out with a little metal tool and flushed it, and then scrubbed and scrubbed until my hands looked like I'd been out in winter without gloves. The smell didn't leave until later when I woke again at 3 with the taste of iron in my mouth and my knee hot, like I'd knelt on a hearthstone. I don't go into cemeteries at night anymore. That sounds like a moral stuck to a story, a lesson I learned. It's more like an arrangement. If I walk past the gates of any place with stones and names and a quiet deeper than the city around it, I keep my eyes on the pavement and I keep moving and I put my hands in my pockets so they don't lift the latch without my permission. I don't use my tripod now either. I shoot handheld or not at all. I bought a different camera, not because I think technology keeps anything out, but because the old one felt like a door I'd already opened once by mistake. I kept the SD card in its plastic box in my desk drawer until last week, when I went to throw it out and found it wasn't in the box. I don't know where it went. I don't know why the empty box smelled like wet cloth and pennies. Yesterday, a friend posted photos from Edinburgh. Tourists at the castle, a piper near the bridge, the same shiny-nosed dog. And I scrolled faster than a person who isn't bothered would. The last photo was a long exposure of the kirkyard taken over a wall from the street. Blurred lights haloing the stones. In the lower left corner, there's the hint of an iron gate out of focus, a black lattice against gray. When I pressed my thumb and forefinger to zoom, the photo snapped back to small and the phone closed the app like it was tired. Maybe that's nothing. Maybe I want there to be nothing so badly that I'm making it into something. But if you are ever near that church at night, and the wind goes sideways and your phone finds service where it shouldn't, and you hear that quiet metal on metal like a person testing a latch to see if it will give, don't take a picture. Don't set a timer. Don't kneel. Even if you're sure you won't. Especially if you're sure. Because I didn't, and I did. And every time my doorbell rings once at 2:21 and then doesn't ring again, I stand in the dark without moving and try to remember if I locked the gate. I don't have a gate. I check anyway. I hesitated for a week before typing this because it feels like I'm breaking a promise and I'm not even sure to whom. Maybe to the people who trusted me with keys. Maybe to the city itself. My name doesn't matter, but I work with audio. Field recordings, ambient soundscapes, the kind of stuff most people skip in a playlist. I'm the sort who hears a refrigerator hum and starts counting the beat. I'm from Buenos Aires originally, though I left years ago. I came back this past spring to help my dad after knee surgery and to finally close the apartment my grandparents left us. While I was here, I started chasing sounds again. The city had a different throat now. New buses, more motorcycles, fewer payphones, the same parrots in the jacarandas. And then, because I am the sort of idiot who thinks rules don't apply to microphones, I pointed my curiosity toward La Recoleta cemetery. If you've only seen photos, you don't know the half of it. Recoleta isn't a quiet park with graves. It's a small marble city with alleys and corners and glass doors that stare back at you. Cats wander like they own the place. The sun hits those white crypts and you feel it reflect into your eyes. Tourists whisper even when nobody asks them to. I used to walk through it with my grandmother when I was a kid. She'd bring a small cloth to wipe dust from names she recognized and leave candies on shelves, as if the dead would sneak a taste after we left. She taught me not to step on the thresholds. She told me everyone's voice echoes longer among stone. On a Wednesday afternoon in April, I ran into Mariella near the gate by Junin. She wore the blue jacket of maintenance but kept a soft scarf tucked into the collar like armor. She had a jangly ring of keys in the stance of someone who'd been on her feet since dawn. I recognized her from years before. She'd been there a long time. "Otra vez en casa?" she asked, smiling. "Back in town again?" "Por un rato," I said. "For a while." I told her I was recording sounds around the city, collecting what I had missed. When I asked if there were times Recoleta was quiet, she said, "Nunca está en silencio. When it is, we worry." She looked at my gear. I carried a small recorder with XY mics and a pair of old cardioids clamped to a stereo bar, because I never know what I'll need. "If you come early," she said, "before the groups arrive, you'll catch the cats, the birds, and the workers swearing under their breath." If you come late, you'll catch things that sound like wind but don't move the leaves. I laughed because I thought it was a joke. She didn't. 2 mornings later, I met my friend Mateo at the Starbucks on Vicente Lopez because he'd been mixing sound for a documentary and needed caffeine more than advice. Mateo and I went to school together before I left. He kept his hair too long for studio work and lived in a black hoodie no matter the weather. He knows audio like a mechanic knows engines, by vibration and habit. I told him about the cemetery. You want noise prints? He asked. Looking for clean bird song? I told him I was looking for whatever made Mariella talk like that. He sighed. If you bring me marble harmonics and gate creaks, I'll buy you dinner. If you bring me ghosts, you owe me a week off cigarettes. That Sunday, I returned to Recoleta with a small bag. The first hour, I kept to the wide central aisle where tour guides gather and point. A German group was trailing behind a man with a straw hat who said Evita, like he knew her personally. I moved to the side paths where you can peer into vaults through ironwork and see glass cabinets with photographs from another century. I clipped one mic to the bars of a door and held the recorder under the eaves of a crypt with a cracked marble roof. At first, it was exactly what you'd expect. Pigeons cooing too close, a truck downshifting outside the walls, a maintenance guy dragging a plastic bin over stone. Then something new slid under all that, the thinnest, steady hum like a tuning fork held against wood. I pulled the recorder away. The hum persisted. I took off my headphones and pressed my ear to the iron. The chill of the metal knocked a little heat out of me. There it was again, almost polite, almost not there. I set the cardioids apart at shoulder width, aimed them into the small grate on the lower half of the door, and rolled at 96 kilohertz because I had the space. The hum tightened like it was finding me too. I mapped the alley with my feet, step by step, and the pitch changed with distance as if the corridor itself were a set of organ pipes. It was nothing dramatic, just strange, enough to make me chase it. By afternoon, I had an hour and a half of nothing anyone but me would care about. I walked out past the guy who sells cold quilmes by the gate and waved. He nodded, the way people who work near cemeteries learn to nod without smiles. I took the subte home. I didn't notice the oddness until late, until I was in my dad's kitchen, juggling empanadas and guilt for not cleaning more and listening on small speakers. The hum was not one frequency. It sat on a fundamental around 217 hertz, near A3 if you're curious, but it had partials that rose and fell in a pattern that didn't quite match the wind. Every few seconds, the third harmonic would waver exactly 17 cents down, like a singer leaning on a note. When I ran a spectrogram on my laptop, the formants, the bright bands where voices live, cooled and warmed as if a mouth were opening and closing. We do this thing, those of us who record the world. We hear intention in accidents. I told myself it was just that. I told myself Recoleta had a throat and I'd found it clearing. I sent a clip to Mateo with a lazy caption, El cementerio canta. The cemetery sings. He pinged back a few minutes later. You're messing with me. I'm not. He asked for the raw file. I sent it. The next afternoon he called. I did a quick match, he said. Don't get excited, but those formants, they look like speech. Vowels, not just random noise. It's nonsense, no consonants, but the mouth shapes are real. From what? I said. He was quiet for a beat. From someone with a deepish voice who used to smoke. Female or male could be, but older. It's stupid. I'm sending pictures. I opened his email and looked at side-by-side spectrograms. My Recoleta hum on the left and a reference he'd pulled from an old interview with a singer from the 60s. The kind recorded in a live room with too much tile. The reference showed long horizontal bars for ah and o sounds. Mine had blurry cousins of the same. It wasn't proof of anything. It was enough to make me think about Mariella's scarf tucked in tight. I went back the next morning with permission. I didn't sneak. I asked Mariella. I told her I was trying to capture resonance. She gave me a key to a tiny service door that opened to a narrow path between 2 high walls. Don't be where you shouldn't, she said. If you hear your name, leave. I waited for the punchline. She didn't give one. There's an alley near the older section where the crypts lean closer than neighbors sharing gossip. The path tilts. Rainwater must collect there the way time collects in basements. I stood at one door with a broken handle and pressed my mic through the smallest diamond in the grill. The inside smelled like dry paper and the cold sweetness of stone. The hum caught my ear again, a little higher this time, like the pitch you get when you blow across the mouth of a bottle. I set the recorder down, hands flat on the marble to feel the vibration. The hum wasn't steady. It pulsed as if counting. 4 long, 2 short, a breath more. I wrote it down because I'm superstitious about numbers when they come as a gift. While I worked, a tour passed behind me. A woman with red hair told a couple from Ohio by the sound of their vowels about the Duarte family. A cat yawned at my shoe. A worker walked by carrying new glass panes and didn't look at me at all. When the lane cleared, I pulled out, moved one door down, and listened again. The hum there was duller, like a note damped by cloth. I logged it, moved again, logged, moved. When I reached the end, my page of numbers looked like bad notation for a song. That night, I brought the pattern to Matteo. He had already built a little script to analyze modulation over time. We fed my numbers in like a prank. The script kicked back a suggestion I've never wanted a computer to make. The intervals matched vowel transitions common in Rio Platense Spanish. Not syllables, not words, just the way a mouth would move if it were about to shape them. Wind does weird things in alleys, I said. Matteo shrugged, and marble does weirder. But listen to this. He hit play. He had filtered the recording, just a gentle high pass and a notch to cut traffic rumble, and then flattened the dynamics. The hum came up like someone had rolled a dimmer. Under it, something else poked through. A texture like voices in another room when you're too tired to focus on words. If you've ever sat outside a family gathering on a hot day, letting the talk blur into music, you know the sound. This had that warmth without the comfort. I have a contact at the municipal archive, Matteo said almost apologetically. He digitized a bunch of old funeral recordings. Maybe eulogies recorded on cassettes, sometimes reel-to-reel, sometimes those ridiculous micro-cassettes that lawyers loved. I'm going to ask for a few samples for comparison. Are we going to tell him why? No. We're going to tell him you're writing a piece and want old voices. 2 days later, I met the archivist in a room that smelled like iron and lemon cleaner. He was a soft-spoken man named Ernesto with a careful beard. He handed Matteo a USB drive like a sacrament. Don't publish, he said. Families don't always know these exist. We promised. On the subway home, I pressed my thumb against the plastic of the drive and thought about Mariella's jingling keys. It was late when we compared. We opened a file labeled Maria C. 1979 Service Side A. Crackle, then the gentle thrum of a room. A man's voice formal, grieving in the way old men perform grief, talking about a woman's garden and her patience. We matched the vowel formants to peaks in my cemetery hum. I know how this sounds. I can hear your skepticism because a week ago it would have been mine. But when we lined the spectrograms up and reduced them to shapes, the peaks kissed, not perfectly, but close enough to lean. We tried another file, Rodolfo L. 1986 Service. The same ache in the vowels. We should have stopped there, declared victory for pareidolia, and gone to bed. But we didn't. We kept feeding ghosts into code. I didn't sleep much that night. The city was humid and loud and smelled faintly of fried onions from the stand by the bus stop. My dad snored. My grandmother's old clock in the hall clicked in a way that made my teeth hurt. I put on headphones and listened again to the alley. Somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, a sound in the recording stepped forward as if it had finally gathered courage. It wasn't a word. It was the shape of one. My name without consonants, the way a stranger would whisper it if their tongue were made of paper. The second time it came, there was a breath before it, a small intake like surprise. At 9, I went back to Recoleta. I told myself I was checking a hypothesis. The guard at the gate didn't stop me when I said Mariella. I found her cleaning leaves out of a drain with a broom. She listened while I explained the harmonics and the vowel shapes in the funerals. She didn't look like she thought I was crazy. She looked like she was confirming something she suspected. You can hear the singing better at night, she said. I can't be here at night, I said. She twirled her keys in her palm, then stopped. I have to come back at 9 to lock the workshops, she said. Meet me then. Don't tell anyone. It's a particular kind of cold in Recoleta at night. Not the temperature, the sensation that when the sun goes, the stone remembers being a quarry. The names glow under little lamps that some families install, or catch the moon when there is one. That night there wasn't. The cats disappeared. The city outside the wall kept being itself. Motorcycles, laughter, a bus braking. But everything inside seemed to lean its head to listen. We didn't use flashlights. Mariella said the light upsets the birds and taught me where to put my feet on muscle memory alone. She brought me to that tilted lane beside the older crypts and stood back while I set the microphones. The hum came up within seconds as if we'd tapped a wire. It wasn't just one note anymore. It was a stack, not chords, more like layers of air shaved thin. I watched the levels, halfway worried that a sudden swell would clip the take, halfway worried by a different thought I didn't want to finish. The sound had a pattern, not just rise and fall, but a call and response. Somewhere far in the network of corridors, something would tighten, and then here, like an echo, another line would lift. "Do you hear it shape words?" I whispered. Mariella shook her head. "I hear the names in the morning after." In the dust, we stood for an hour. Once, Mariella pointed, and we saw a small procession beyond the corner. 2 men in dark suits, a woman in a coat too heavy for April, a priest in a collar. They moved without speaking. When they passed, they left no scent of perfume, no squeak of shoe leather, nothing. I made a mark on my log and pretended I understood anything. Toward the end, the hum drifted down into a warmth I can only describe as intimate. The way a room hums when your family is in it, and someone is telling a story you know by heart. The recorder felt warm under my hand. At minute 47:12, the entire lane tightened like a throat. The fundamental slid up 2 semitones. The layer above it shook and settled back. And then, without consonants, something said a name. Not mine, Isabella. The A was open and sad. The I was pinched like someone used to singing. My aunt's name is Isabella. She is alive. She lives in Flores. She makes terrible flan. I did not tell Mariella that. I just whispered, "You heard that?" And Mariella nodded and crossed herself, quick and embarrassed. We left at 11. Outside the gate, the cold beer man was packing his plastic table. He didn't look up. I walked the long way home because I felt too watched to take a straight line. On Las Heras, I passed a cop car idling with the windows down, and a pair of officers telling each other jokes they didn't want to laugh at. On Callao, a guy played de música ligera too fast on a guitar with one missing string. I wanted real voices to clean my ears. The next day, Mateo came to my dad's place with media lunas and a look I didn't like. He set down his laptop and said, "I ran another comparison. You're not going to be happy. Tell me." I grabbed a clip from Radio Nacional, a late-night call-in show from the 80s. There's an old caller named Isabella. She says "buenas noches" in this exact shape. He tapped the screen and showed me 2 spectrograms, my night hum and the caller's greeting. The peaks in the formants lined like lattice. The data told a story it couldn't possibly know. "There's more," he said, and I realized he'd held it back as if he wanted to be kind. I isolated a whisper at the very end of your take. I think it's you." I didn't speak, I said. "You breathed. Everyone does, but this is your mouth. The way it forms the vowel in your name when you say it in English. You know how you round it? It's that. Only the timing is wrong." "How wrong?" He looked at his screen like it owed him money. "The metadata on the file says the whisper comes from a frame that doesn't exist yet." "I know that's not how files work, I know. But it's offset by 3 minutes and 8 seconds past the end of the recording. When I extend the analysis window into the silence, there it is. Your breath. Something that sounds like you saying, 'I'm here.'" I wanted to tell him it was a buffer error. I wanted to blame a plug-in, or my cheap SD card, or the fact that the building's wiring was old and the fridge clicked like a metronome. Instead, I told him the truth that scared me more. I think the cemetery sang my aunt's name. We went back that evening because fear in me has always worn the costume of curiosity. It was raining, a thin mist that slicked the stone and made the names glisten as if they had fresh varnish. Mariella met us by the workshop. No scarf this time, her hair tied back. "2 minutos," she said. 2 minutes because the weather would close the place and she didn't want to explain. We moved fast to the alley, set the mics with fingers that fumbled more than the cold should allow. The hum came like a polite cough. It built again, the same braid of layers. Mateo watched the screen, not the crypts. At minute 04:23, he raised a hand like a conductor, as if he could tell the sound to wait. He pointed at the spectrogram. Peaks were forming the way dew forms, everywhere at once and individually small. They tallied into shapes we recognized. That's the horrible part. We can tell ourselves myth or math. The picture is the same. The sound swelled, not louder, just closer. I felt an urge to lean toward it, like when someone uses your name in a crowd. It shaped an O that felt like a mouth around your knuckle. It held that O too long, and all the air between the crypts seemed to agree. Then, without transition, we heard the tail end of a sentence that began elsewhere. Breathy and urgent, and Matteo flinched away from his own speakers. It was my voice. It was the frayed edge of "I'm here," and I hadn't said it, not yet. I told myself not to speak those words ever again, as if language were a wand you could snap in half. Mariella stepped between us and the door with the broken handle. She put her hand on the metal and closed her eyes. When she spoke, it was ordinary Spanish, the kind people use with animals and children. "Está bien," she said softly. "It's okay. La casa está cerrada. No hay visita. The house is closed. There are no visitors." The hum pressed an instant longer, then relaxed to its original thinness, embarrassed, almost shy. We stood and shook for reasons we pretended were the rain. We should have left it at that, but the next morning the archive called. Ernesto said a family had asked to hear recordings of their grandmother's service from the 70s. He wanted an engineer present to make sure the tapes didn't snap. Matteo volunteered us both because he didn't want to be alone. We met in a room with a cassette deck that looked as old as me. The family, 2 sisters and a nephew, sat folding their hands as if in church, eyes bright with something I didn't want near my own chest. Ernesto cued the tape. The room filled with the low, round drone of a service hall and the sound of a man weeping quietly into his jacket. Then a woman's voice offering a memory about flour-dusted hands and a birthday cake. The tape hiccuped, and under that murmur, so truly under it you'd only know if you were waiting, the same hum I'd carried home from the alley brushed the room. The nephew looked around as if someone had opened a window. "Do you hear that?" one sister asked. "It's the room," Ernesto said at once, a lie generous enough to count as kindness. When the tape ended, the sisters cried. We said nothing worth recording. The nephew shook my hand too long. On the bus home, I pressed my forehead to the window and watched the city pass in streaks of white and green. I tried not to think about air shaping itself into vowels without a mouth. Before I tell you the last part, I need to say this. I know there are natural explanations. Air channels in the vaults, temperature gradients, the geometry of the alleys. Maybe my mics picked up radio interference, a station relaying an archive of late-night callers, and the phase cancellations carved those forms into familiar shapes. Maybe we mapped longing onto noise because that's what families and cities do. I would love for that to be true. There is safety in flawed equipment. 3 nights after the rain, I couldn't sleep again. It was hot for April, the kind of heat that pretends to be summer for a few hours. I walked out to the balcony to watch a stray dog claim the block from a high wall. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Estás? You around?" A second later, a call came in from a number labeled private. I let it ring once, twice, imagining a scammer or a cousin. On the 3rd ring, I answered and said "Hola," the way I do when I'm tired, which rounds the O too much, and only then, only after my mouth made that shape, did I remember the whisper in the file. I said nothing else because fear made my tongue thin. The line carried sound that wasn't line noise, a room's hum, a soft breath before speech. I heard my own voice say, close to the mic, "I'm here." Exactly the way Matteo had played back from the impossible part of the recording, and then a woman whose vowels sat low in her throat answered with one word, "Isabella," and the call dropped. My phone showed no record of it. The text had vanished too. I thought of deleting the files and then realized there was no safe version of that act either. The next morning, I went to Recoleta with a cloth. My grandmother would have scolded me for coming empty-handed so many times. The sky was a clean white, no real color to it. I brought no gear. I told Mariella I wanted to walk. She smiled like she approved of a child finally behaving. We wandered without talking much. At the door with the broken handle, I wiped the threshold. Dust stuck to the cloth in a fine line that looked like a piece of hair. I leaned in and for once didn't listen for sound. I watched instead. On the inner side of the glass, on the small shelf where families place photos and fold paper prayers, someone had left a tiny radio with a cracked antenna. It wasn't on. It had no battery. I don't know how long it had been there. I didn't open the door to check. I folded the cloth, put it in my pocket, and felt the shape of an old USB drive against my palm like a talisman. I have my files backed up in 3 places. Matteo teased me for it before he asked for one more copy. Mariella told me, when I tried to return her kindness with small talk, that she sleeps with a fan on to make the room full and the voices, if they come, too comfortable to speak. The archive kept their tapes. Ernesto promised to close the box tighter. I haven't gone back at night. I say this here because I think it matters. I believe the cemetery sings. I don't know if it sings to call or to keep company, to recall or to retune. I think marble, like water, remembers the shapes it holds. If you stand long enough in any place where grief has collected, the air will teach you how to open your mouth. Maybe that's all this is. Maybe I tuned myself to a city I'd left and the city tuned back. Maybe some radios never turn off. Maybe there are mouths without bodies still working the old vowels because somebody loved them that way. My dad's knee is better. I'm leaving soon. I keep thinking of the alley's gentle tilt, the way sounds roll to the lowest point if you let them. I tell myself I won't answer private calls anymore. I don't play back the last minute of the night file because I already know how it ends. Sometimes when the refrigerator clicks on, its hum lands near 217 hertz and I catch myself whispering, "Estoy," I am, and then stopping, as if to hold the door for a voice that might finally catch up to me. If you visit Recoleta and you think the wind is singing, don't be clever like me. Don't chase it. Wipe a name you recognize. Not at the cats. If you hear your own mouth forming a word it hasn't said yet, swallow. Leave before the city gets in tune with you. And if on a late night when the power dips and the radio across the hall thins into a shape you could swear you've seen on a screen, you hear your name without consonants, don't say "I'm here," even if you are. Especially if you are. I didn't sit down to write this as a lesson or a legend. I'm writing because I'm tired of waking up at 3:33 and checking my feet. I keep finding a little grit under my nails like powdered stone and moss, and it throws me right back to that month on Koyasan when the nights were more crowded than the days. I'm not a storyteller by nature. I'm a monk. I came to Mount Koya in my late 20s after burning out on a sales job in Osaka, the sort that measured your heartbeat in calls per hour. My family said it was a phase. My older sister Hana cried and told me I was running away. Maybe I was. But I didn't come up here to disappear. I came up to learn how to stay. The first winter I shaved my head and learned to sweep in silence, to fold the zafu cushions with my thumbs pressed just so, to listen to the wind press through the cedars like the breath of a sleeping animal. I learned that real quiet is never empty. It's full of everything you've been ignoring. Okunoin, the cemetery, was where we did most of the grounds work because the tourists couldn't help themselves. They came for the lanterns and the trees, for the stones leaned into by 1,000 years of snow. They left behind plastic water bottles, ribbons, coins balanced on statues' heads. They whispered as if the dead were proctors in a library. Some came at night for the way the lanterns turned fog into amber. We didn't encourage that, though the main path stays lit. There are patrols by the local police sometimes, soft-footed men in caps who bow and apologize for intruding. They liked me because I spoke plainly and kept the tea warm in the guard hut. The head priest at our temple is called Abbot Shun. His mouth is small, and his eyes are sharp. And when you think he's trying to decide what to say, he's actually waiting to see if you'll keep talking on your own. The man closest to me, though, was Brother Jiro. He was older than me by a few years and shorter by a head with arms like braided rope from hauling firewood. He laughed easily, the kind of person who could make a pointing sign feel like a hug. If you needed to carry a ladder, you didn't ask. You just waited and he showed up. Here's how it started. In early spring, when the snow has loosened but the ground's still cold under the top layer, the pilgrims return. The first tour buses arrive, and monks like us groan quietly because it means we'll spend our evenings collecting cigarette butts from the roots of cedar trees older than the oldest maps. The nights were normal, though, until a day when a woman in a pale green coat stopped me near the Gokusho offering hall and asked if the cemetery had hours for prayer after midnight. She had a camera with a long lens and the nervous breath of someone who'd practiced their question. "We close the bridge to the inner sanctuary," I said, "but the main path is open. The police ask visitors to finish by 10. She nodded, disappointed, and then asked something that made my teeth feel weird. "Is it true about the faces?" "What faces?" I said more sharply than I meant. "The faceless people," she said, "on the night paths. My friend sent me a message. She came last year. She said to come at 3:33 and bring rice for the Jizo. She said if I saw them and didn't show fear, they would guide me to a wish." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to be kind. Instead, I told her not to come that late, that if she did, I wouldn't be the one scolding her. "Some things on a mountain don't know the difference between a wish and a debt," I said. She smiled like I had given her the address to a secret bar. That night I mentioned it to Jiro as we ladled miso. He wrinkled his nose. Someone always adds a minute to make it creepier, he said. At my mother's temple it was 2:22. We forgot about it until a week later when Hana came up for a weekend. She does that once or twice a year, bringing city snacks and gossip like offerings. She slept in the guest room and fussed over my blankets and told me she was seeing someone new, a paramedic who kept candy in his pockets for anxious kids. We walked Okunoin in the late afternoon because she said the air there always made her headaches disappear. She talks to stones the way other people talk to dogs. She doesn't expect an answer. She just trusts that someone is listening. We just passed the row of old companies' memorials, stone rockets, round helmets for workers dead in some accident decades ago, when a police officer I knew, Sato, came up the path. He bowed, smiled at Hana, and asked if he could speak to me for a moment. "The camera's at the first bridge," he said quietly, tilting his head so Hana wouldn't hear. "Picked up a group moving through at 3:30 last night. No faces on the footage," I blinked. "Masks?" I asked. "Not masks," he said. "It's like their heads were there but blurred out. All of them. 6 or 7. No hurry, no looking around." They kept to the path. Then at 3:33 they stopped at the third lantern and turned together to look up into the trees. After that, gone. The other camera didn't catch them. "There's a blind spot," I said, because I knew about the angle there. I tried to smile. "Badlands. I sent the clip to the station tech," he said. He asked me not to send it again. He gave a small, embarrassed laugh that told me he wasn't just teasing. That night I woke on my own at 3:29 with the soft panic of a dream I couldn't remember. I tried the usual. Long exhale, roll the prayer beads, but my throat felt dry, and a pressure sat just behind my nose like the warning ache before a nosebleed. The wind was moving in the tall cedars. I knew what time it was without checking. I checked anyway, 3:31. It matters that I'm not brave. People assume monks are brave because we sleep near graves and walk in fog. Mostly we're just used to things. But that night I put on my sandals and my gray coat and stepped outside because something in me was too ashamed to stay in bed. I told myself I was going to the guard hut to make tea for whoever was on patrol, and maybe I believed it. The courtyard stones were wet with mist. A cat that sleeps near the kitchen skittered across my path and yelled at me once like an old woman. The outer lanterns of Okunoin make a low burr sound, a grounding hum you stop hearing when you're used to it. I heard it that night, though, like someone dragging a hand across a drum skin. I walked the main path, keeping my attention slightly down the way you're taught on long meditations. Not staring, not avoiding. There are stone statues of Jizo and Kannon everywhere there, some with hats knitted by grandmothers who climbed up 3 times a week and tied them on with hands swollen by age. It makes the dead look looked after. I have never once felt unsafe on that path. At 3:33, I reached the third lantern. They were already there. I thought they were tourists at first, pilgrims in plain coats, hoods up, hands tucked into sleeves. There were 7. They weren't talking. Their shoes were quiet, which is why I didn't hear them until I was almost among them. They were the color of the night itself. Not black. You never see black up there, not really. Night is green and brown and cloud, and they seemed washed in all those colors at once. Nobody looked at me. Nobody looked at anything. They faced ahead as if something far down the path were pulling them forward. Their steps matched the hum of the lanterns. I stepped to the side, pressed my back lightly to a cedar so I wouldn't block them, and murmured the little apology we use when we bump someone with a rake. They passed within arm's reach. That was when the first one turned his head slightly, as if to glance at me, and I realized I could not find his face in the place where a face should be. Not a blur like Sato said. Not a blank. There was a sense of the right shape, the small forward press of a nose, the hollow where a mouth would live. But when my eyes tried to fix on any feature, they gave up and slid away like oil on stone. I thought ridiculously that I needed my glasses even though I don't wear any. The second one turned too, then the third, and each time my gaze snagged and skidded, leaving an oily echo of a visage in my brain that made my eyes water. They weren't hiding their faces. They didn't have faces to hide. I told myself there was fog, that trickster, and I didn't breathe for a count of 5. When I did, I could smell wet cedar and faint soap and the human salt of someone who had walked a long way. They stopped at the lantern together like a murmuration of birds deciding to land, and then all of them tilted their heads back in one motion, as if answering a bell I couldn't hear. I heard nothing, but I felt something change in the angle of the air, the way your skin tingles a moment before thunder. I think that's what made my body move, because I didn't decide to. My feet picked themselves up and set themselves down behind the seven as they began to walk again. It is difficult to explain how terrifying it is to walk because your body is polite. I didn't feel commanded. I felt the weight of custom. When people move on a path in Japan, you show respect without being told. You follow rules because they are the bones of peace. And yet the part of me that is purely mine screamed to cut across the moss and run. I thought of Abbot Shun's mouth, pinched tight as if he were holding back a shout. I thought of Hana's habit of touching each gravestone with her pinky like a greeting. I thought of the woman with the camera asking about wishes like asking about a vending machine. I kept walking because the alternative would have required me to make a scene in a place that consumed scenes like rain. They turned off the main path at a little side trail used by groundskeepers. It's not closed, but it's not advertised. The further you step from the main lanterns, the more the night feels like it has texture. Your breath hangs close to your face and doesn't want to wander. The mist sits on your shoulders like wet cloth. There are tiny jizo in the hollows of stumps there, faces rounded by centuries of weather. The seven moved through those shadows, and the shadows did not cling to them. It was the other way around, as if the shadows were tugged forward by their passing. We reached a place I knew well, where a low stone wall crumbles into a depression pooled with leaves. You can't see it from the main path. In the daytime, I'd once cleared beer cans from this little hollow and found a child's bright sock underneath the leaves. I've never liked the way sound behaves there. Even whispers feel heavy. They stopped again. One of them, an average height person, perhaps a woman, though I will not swear to it, put a hand out slightly as if to balance on nothing. And then they did something so ordinary it took all the strangeness away and then replaced it with a deeper kind. They took off their sandals and set them neatly side by side on the ground. I didn't know I was crying until one tear made a chilly ribbon over my upper lip. The gesture was familiar. We set our sandals like that at the threshold of the temple, or at the edge of a tatami where a room becomes a room. It is a way of saying, I know where I am and who I am to this place. It is a way of asking permission to enter. The other 6 did the same. 7 pairs aligned. I looked down at my own feet and saw that at some point I had stepped out of my sandals too. They were aligned next to the larger pair as if a considerate host had made room. My toes pressed into the cold earth. I felt the tiny grit of eroded stone, the sponge-soft give of wet moss. The night pressed close around my ankles the way cattails brush your skin in the dark. I whispered, I don't belong here, which was not a prayer but a fact. And somewhere behind me a tiny sound answered. One of the bell charms the grandmothers tie to small shrines. The sound of a bronze tongue tapping. In the next minute or hour, or breath, the language of time doesn't want to live in that hollow. The 7 lifted their hands and without turning their head shapes in any new direction, each of them rested their palm against an old stone marker in the wall. I have worked that wall. I know the stones. They are nameless now, their names scoured off by weather. Perhaps that made them no one's and everyone's. I didn't choose to move, but I moved. My hand found a small stone near the end. It was cold, older than any pencil marks in my childhood, and I set my palm to it. The instant I did, a sense of being counted passed through me, counted like beads rolling under a fingertip. I inhaled and nearly choked because the air changed. It smelled suddenly of candle smoke and soy and a kitchen floor after a mop. The precise scent of my mother's apartment on New Year's Day when I was 14, sitting by the space heater with my socks steaming. It lasted a blink and was gone. I pressed harder and tasted salt like the water in Osaka Bay where we used to dangle our feet at night. The stone thrummed from the center out like a voice choosing a chest instead of a throat. The 7 didn't speak, but something answered. The cedar boughs above us sighed all together, though the air was still. The hum of the main lanterns bent into a low chord, and then I heard other feet approaching on the path we had left, the soft shuffle of someone uncertain of their welcome. A small light bobbed between the trees. It was a flashlight, the kind tourists carry, cupped in a hand to keep it from flaring, and the hand belonged to the woman in the pale green coat. She was alone. When she saw us, she stopped, lifting the light a little, and I saw on its edge that she was already crying the way someone cries when the answer has been yes for a long time, and they've only now noticed. She took a half step forward and then froze because she had seen our sandals lined up. Her gaze slid over the seven, refused to focus on their faces, and then snagged on mine. "Is this where I make the wish?" she asked me because I was the only face the night would give her. "No," I said. My throat felt like a bruise. "This is where you remember what you asked for last time." She shook her head, frantic the way someone does when you've misunderstood their language. "I never—" A voice interrupted her, but it came from the stones under our hands, not from any mouth. It was not words, or it was, but not words you could write down. If pressed, I would say it felt like the moment in a conversation when you realize you were not being polite with your friend, when you were asking them not to change. The woman sobbed once and knelt fast, almost falling, and put her forehead to the cold wall. Her flashlight fell and rolled, making the trees leap and sink. I cannot tell you how long we stood like that. My arm shook. My toes ached. Twice I felt the itch of a mosquito and did not dare brush it away. I thought of the little candies Hannah brings for the altar, the sour plums crinkled like thyme, the way she whispers to the stones and thanks them for standing. I thought of my paramedic brother-in-law, whom I had not yet met. I thought of Abbot Shun's mouth and wondered what shape it made around the word leave. When the pressure changed again, it was a relief so sharp I almost wet myself. The seven withdrew their hands in unison and turned, not to me, not to the woman, but toward the main path. I blinked hard because the tears had made my vision smear, and in that blur I saw something for a fraction of a breath that has undermined every answer I have ever been given. For that fraction, each faceless head held a face, not one, but many, overlapping like reflections in rain, features layered like thin paper. I thought I saw Hannah, or the idea of her. I thought I saw my father, who refuses to visit Koyasan because he's afraid of heights. I thought I saw a boy I knew in school who drowned in a river. I thought I saw a version of myself with a different mouth. And then it was gone, the way a fish flips under a dark surface, leaving only widening rings. They walked back to their sandals but did not put them on. They stepped to the side, leaving the neat pairs untouched, and moved along the side path without a sound. The woman in green lifted her head as they passed and made a small sound, the question of a child. They did not answer. They didn't need to. They were the answer. When they were gone, the hum of the lanterns resumed its normal pitch and the trees looked like trees again. My body remembered itself. My feet remembered they were cold. I bent to pick up my sandals and saw that the pair beside mine were the cheap kind we kept for guests, the ones we stacked by the door. The little stamp we used to mark them, our temple's name in tiny characters, was dim with damp. For a second, I couldn't put my feet in. It felt like an apology. It felt like stealing. I slid them on because my toes were numb. The woman wiped her face with her sleeve and groped for her flashlight. She didn't look at me. "I brought rice," she said, as if confessing. "Leave it for Jizo," I said. "I think I already did," she said. And her voice quavered on the last word in a way that made me want to hold her hand, like you hold a stranger's hand on a bus after a hard stop. We walked back to the main path together without speaking. When we reached the guard hut, Sato was there on the step blowing on a cup of tea. He looked up, and I know my face told him too much. He put the cup down without drinking and stood. "You're barefoot," he said. I looked down. He was right. My sandals were gone, and I was standing in a shallow pattern of my own damp footprints. He didn't joke. He went inside and came back with a pair of spare slippers and a towel. The practicalities of kindness. The woman thanked him and left, clutching the towel like a certificate. Sato didn't ask. We sat side by side, listening to the pines make their old sea noise. "On the camera last night," he said eventually. "One of them left. Something." I felt like sand had replaced the blood in my veins. "What?" "A pair of sandals," he said. "Guest ones. We could read your temple's stamp. But when we went to fetch them, they were gone." I didn't tell Abbot Shun right away. That was cowardice, and I carry it. I soaked my feet in warm water and scrubbed them with the rough cloth we use for the bath floor. And the grit under my nails was dark green, as if I'd been digging in old bread. You can decide that I imagined that. I was ready to decide many things that morning. Hannah left after breakfast, kissing the top of my head and telling me my ears were cold. In the afternoon, the woman in the green coat came back with a bag of rice tied with red string and set it at a small shrine with hands that didn't shake. She avoided my eye in a way that felt grateful. Jiro asked me why I limped. I told him I'd stepped on a pine cone. He told me to wear thicker socks, and we laughed, and that also felt like a kind of prayer. At evening sutra, I couldn't keep the words in my mouth. They slid off my tongue like fish down a rock. I went to Abbot Shun after and admitted that I had walked at 3:33 and followed the 7. I expected a scolding about safety and superstition. Instead, he poured me tea, held his cup so lightly steam made the skin of the tea breathe, and said, "Did you speak?" "No." "Good, did you count?" "Yes," I said, startled. I felt counted." He nodded as if I had told him my name. "There are those who keep the path for those who cannot see it," he said. "Sometimes they look like monks. Sometimes they look like tourists. Face or no face, duty wears what it needs to." "What duty?" I asked too quickly. "Ours or theirs?" He smiled without showing teeth. "That is not a useful distinction." I wanted to ask more. He changed the subject to the cabbage in the garden and the leak under the kitchen eaves, and I obeyed the hint. I did not sleep that night, and yet at 3:33 I woke with my heart behaving like a small animal inside a drum. I did not go out. The next morning my sandals were by the door where I'd left them, but for the first time since I arrived on the mountain, I checked the little stamp to see if it truly was ours. Over the next week the same pattern repeated. An hour after midnight, some feeling like a pressure system arriving would roll through the temple. The cats would hide, not because they were afraid, but because they were busy. The wind would lay itself down. At 3:33 I would wake. On 2 nights I stayed in bed, sweating, praying to nothing specific. On the 3rd and 4th nights I went as far as the courtyard and stood with my hands under my sleeves like someone about to apologize. I did not go to the path. On the 5th night I found grit under my nails again and no memory of where I'd been. I saw the 7 twice more, and once it was not 7 but 5. Once I think it was 9. Always the same quiet, the same tilt of head, the same grace in the way they set their sandals aside. Once at the little hollow, the woman in green returned with a man at her side. Late 30s, hair cropped short, a uniform peeking under a civvy's jacket. His face was collapsed in on itself the way a man's face collapses when he's been stopping other people's bleeding for a living. He held her hand. He did not lift his own toward the stones. He bowed instead, low, until his forehead nearly touched the ground. I came down from the mountain in early summer because my sister had her wedding and demanded I stand in front for once instead of at the edge watching. I wore a suit that made my hands look like someone else's. Her husband did keep candy in his pockets, and he smiled with his whole face. At the reception, a paramedic colleague of his asked me if ghosts were real on Koyasan. I said nothing and then said, "Some people are heavier than others," and he laughed and assumed I was being poetic. Back at the temple, the season swung into green, and the grandmothers' hats on the Jizo changed from wool to cotton. The police came by less because summer nights fill with the good sort of trespassers, teenagers holding hands with the cocky reverence of newly brave people. The woman in green sent a postcard addressed to the temple, with a photograph she'd taken of morning fog in the cedars. On the back she wrote, "I did not make a wish. I think I made a promise a long time ago and came to pay it. Thank you for not letting me ask for more." She did not leave a return address. This is the part that keeps me from calling what I saw a story. Last week, far from the mountain at my father's apartment in Wakayama, where I went to fix a leaky sink, I woke at 3:33 in a room without lanterns. The city hum replaced trees. I went to the kitchen for water and saw by the balcony door my sandals set neatly side by side as if someone had come to the threshold and known how to wait. I hadn't put them there. My father doesn't touch my things. He is careful that way. I picked one up and turned it over in my hand to look at the stamped characters. For a second, the little mark made me dizzy because I could have sworn it was not our temple's stamp. Not exactly, but the impression of it, as if the stamp had been carved by someone remembering the shape of the letters from a dream. Maybe the mountain followed me down. Maybe I brought it. Maybe there are places in the world that are always the same place when the air presses on your face at the right angle. I can tell myself anything and not sleep any better. I want to end with instructions with a clean warning like a sign on a path. Do not go at 3:33. Do not bring rice. Do not follow. But I know the truth. You won't go because a stranger told you not to. You'll go because something counted you a long time ago, and you've been moving toward the question ever since. If you do go, set your sandals neatly. That's not superstition. It's manners. If you see them, the ones without faces, do not try to look too hard. Your eyes will slide away and your heart will find its own work. And if one day you wake and find grit under your nails and you live nowhere near a mountain, know this. You don't have to climb stairs or cross a bridge to reach a threshold. Some thresholds arrive while you are sleeping and ask to be treated like doors. Listen for the hum. Count without numbers. And if after it's passed, you look down and find that one of the pairs of sandals by your door is yours but also not yours, shaped by your feet and stamped by a place you've never been, do what I do. Pick them up. Place them by the wall. Say thank you to a room you cannot see. Then go back to bed and pretend you had been up for water. In the morning, when someone asks why you were walking around at night, tell them you weren't and check your toes for moss. If there's a little grit there, shake it off in the sink and don't look too closely at its color. It's just stone, you'll say. It's just dirt, but you'll never again mistake the sound of lanterns for electricity. You'll hear it in other places, subway tunnels, stairwells, hospitals at night. The soft hum that means someone is arranging their sandals in the dark, preparing to step where your eyes won't follow. If you're very polite and very tired and very lucky, you will forget to be afraid and remember instead what you owe. I am trying to do the same. That's all this is. That's all I wanted to say before I put my sandals away and wait to see if I wake at 3:33 again. If I do, I won't go out. I'll press my palm to the wall next to the bedroom door and listen to whatever lives inside that old plaster. If it answers, I'll pretend it's the wind. If it doesn't, I'll still say thank you. And if in the bath the next morning the water clouds around my toes green as cedar, I will not be surprised. I'll dry my feet, check the stamp, and leave my sandals neatly for whoever keeps count of us when we forget our names. I don't care if anyone believes me, I just need to put this out there. It's been a year and I still wake up at the same time every night, with the taste of damp soil on my tongue and the sound of a generator coughing itself awake. Most nights I can talk myself down, tell myself it was just bad hours, too much coffee, or the way floodlights turn leaves into moving hands. But then I remember the diary, and the names and the way Amir's radio kept saying my surname in a voice that wasn't his. I'm writing this because I feel like I left something in the ground out at Bukit Brown, and whatever it is keeps tugging at me like a thread. I wasn't supposed to be there long. I'm not an archaeologist or a historian. I do film work. Documentaries mostly. I have a small company that takes on odd jobs when big studios don't want to bother. Community archives, oral histories, small grant projects that pay just enough. When the call came from a heritage group that needed someone to record a fast-moving exhumation before a road project expanded, I said yes because I needed the money and because Bukit Brown is the kind of place you can't stop thinking about once you've walked through it. Even at noon, it feels like dusk. The trees are huge and old. The humidity is thick and the tombs are tucked into the earth like the caps of buried mushrooms. Crickets, birds, distant traffic, it all has this muffled edge like the sound is wrapped in leaves. I told myself I wasn't there to make a statement, just to record what was happening as carefully and respectfully as possible. We were a small crew. My cousin Mei Lin is a heritage activist. Half of why I got the gig was because she vouched for me. She was there during the day, gentle but relentless with the officials, labeling headstones with chalk numbers, photographing carvings, grumbling that what should take months was being squeezed into weeks. At night, when the excavators and trucks cleared out and the site lights came on, it was me and Amir and whoever pulled security for that shift. Amir is a machine operator I've known since we shot a factory safety training video together. He jokes about everything. And on night jobs, he brings a little electric kettle and argues about soccer with the security guard. The guards rotated. The one we got most often was Uncle Lim, a thin older guy who wore a faded security badge like a school prefect badge, and brewed kopi sachets so thick you could stand a spoon in them. There were others, Mr. Ko, the site engineer who kept saying no drama like it was a spell, and Raj, the foreman who had the patience of a father of 5, but at night it was mostly us. The first week was ordinary and the way work is ordinary even in strange places. We kept our area lit with 3 floodlights. I wired lav mics to the heritage volunteers when they came to do late-night cataloging. I filmed the careful brushing of soil from porcelain bowls, the way lichen came off in little curls. We marked plots with small flags. We logged plaque inscriptions. We said goodnight to birds we never saw. It was quiet, except for the generator's steady throbbing and the occasional 2-stroke buzz from a scooter on the road outside the fence. The heat didn't break at night. It just pressed differently. Sweat gathered in the hollow of my back and under my camera strap. I kept thinking I heard rain and it was only leaves. The thing that hooked under my skin was tiny at first. Chalk numbers rubbed clean on a headstone we'd just labeled. A flag that moved after I filmed it. Not like wind had tugged it over, but like someone had lifted it and planted it again 3 feet away. Maylin swore I was imagining it, then later admitted she'd been having the same problem. We joked that the civet cats were running a prank channel, but we started photographing every flag after we set it, so we'd know if it changed. The photographs didn't lie. A few markers shifted at night between my wrap and the morning crew's arrival, and we had no footage because my cameras faced the other way. Mr. Coe made a note and told us to double knot the flags. Uncle Lim rolled his eyes and said the wind in this place didn't blow in straight lines. On the 8th night, we opened the tomb with the marble guardian lions. I don't know the language for this, the right words, but the tomb had a presence. It wasn't the biggest. It was low and curved, the stone smooth and moss dark. The lions had gentle faces and chipped ears. There was no direct family contact on record for this plot, which meant exhumation proceeded with ritual and documentation, but no relatives. The heritage group had left a bundle of joss sticks and a small paper offering. Uncle Lim fussed over it like a grandfather, lit a coil of mosquito repellent, and told the empty air we were here to respect and record. Amir ran the machine with his usual careful, almost tender touch. The bucket shaved the soil like a spoon skimming milk. I filmed and tried not to blink. We found the box under the lip of the stone, not inside. It was where the soil met the base, like someone had tucked it there after the tomb was built and forgotten to tell anyone. It wasn't fancy. Copper, maybe. It looked like a lunch tin someone took to sea and then forgot on the pier. I thought it would be trinkets or old coins. Inside was a diary wrapped in oilcloth that smelled like old cabinets. The leather had a faded British crest stamped on it, and the edges were stuck together. I filmed while Maylene eased it open with the soft hands she uses for everything breakable. The first page had a date I remember without checking my footage. 14th in September, 1891. There was a name in careful black ink, Reverend Dr. A.J. Collingridge, and a line underneath it that read, in small, neat handwriting, survey, excavation, and consignment of sites to be disturbed for the new municipal road. We were all quiet in that way that isn't reverent yet, but might be. Uncle Lim crossed himself, then laughed in embarrassment and said, habit. Maylin started to grin because this was a researcher's jackpot. Raj came over and said, library later. Work now. But he didn't make us put it away immediately. He watched while I pointed my mic towards Maylin's whispering as she turned pages. Most were lists, not prayers, not journal entries. Lists of plots, names, planned dates of disturbance. Some entries had little notes in the margin, stone cracked or family objects cataloged by Mrs. G. There was a map sketch of the hill that wasn't exactly right but wasn't wrong either. And there, 3 pages in, were names we had chalked hours before, with dates in a column, not 1891 or 1892, but dates like 14 June 2024, or 3 July 2024, and 26 August 2024. Our dates, we joked first, because that's what you do when your brain thinks it's misfiring. Looks like they plan to time travel, Amir said, and did the movie woo noise. Maylin traced a finger down the page to a plot number we had flagged near the bend of the hill. The handwriting was tidy and strange, the numerals with little hooks on their feet. Next to the plot name was a note that said, open at midnight. Do not leave unobserved. Uncle Lim said the Reverend wrote like a school teacher and spread his hands as if that explained anything. I filmed as calmly as I could and suggested maybe a previous exhumation project had used an old diary for notes as a joke or for style, the way some cafes write their menus on vintage ledgers. It made sense for maybe 10 seconds. The diary's paper felt old in the way dry leaves feel old, and the name in the corner of the page, of the person whose tomb entry lined up with our day's schedule, matched the headstone we'd labeled that afternoon. Mr. Coe told us to bag the diary, label it properly, and keep moving. We will hand to National Heritage Board in the morning, he said in that careful voice his uses when he's pretending this is normal. No need to speculate. But he assigned me to keep an eye on the diary in the little site office, really a prefab container with a fan and a whiteboard. He said it wasn't that he didn't trust everyone. He didn't trust the combination of excitement and exhaustion. People do silly things, he said. We keep it here, out of the rain. He touched the cover like it might be warm. The radio trouble started the next night. Amir's walkie cracked with static and then coughed out a voice that sounded like a recording of him, except it didn't line up with his mouth. He was 20 meters away, laughing at something Raj said, and his radio said in his rhythm and accent, "Okay, bring the camera," when those were my words, and I hadn't spoken yet. Then the radio repeated it with a tiny echo. Raj told us to check our channels and then scowled into his. "Too many sets here," he said. "Pick up interference." Uncle Lim said the same thing later, moving his own walkie around like a divining rod. But when it happened again, the voice didn't sound like Amir or me or anyone on site, just a dry whisper speaking plot numbers and dates in the same order as the diary. I caught it on my boom mic because I'd swung it around to catch a joke and left it open. You can hear on the recording, clear as a shopping list. Section C, Slope 2, open at midnight, consignment to road. The first time I played it back, Mei Lin didn't move for a few heartbeats. Then she said maybe someone nearby was messing with us. The fence wasn't particularly high. Kids climb. People dare each other. If it had stayed at whispers, I might have chalked it up to a prankster or a weird radio skip. But there were names. On the 10th night, I flipped open the diary in the site office to see if I could find the Reverend's narrative, something I could quote later. My footage has my hands in frame, the way my finger presses the page down gently. There's a list dated 2 days from then. And there are our names. Operator, Amir bin S. Documenter, my surname initial. Security, Lim Chi. I can't bring myself to write the full names here, even though they were just initials and family names. It felt like finding a letter addressed to you inside a book in a library you've never been to. Underneath our names were dates written smaller, the ink lighter as if the Reverend had added them at night by lamp. Next to Amir's name, there was a date that wasn't 2 days from then. It was a Friday 2 months out. Next to Uncle Lim's name was a Tuesday 1 week beyond that. Next to mine was a date I haven't forgotten because I started waking up at 3:18 a.m. from then on, and that was the time next to it, neat as anything. I didn't show them right away. I told myself I needed to figure out if this was even possible, some clever plant to scare us or keep us alert. I carried the diary out to the open, as if natural light could make the ink reasonable. Mei Lin was discussing signage with a junior officer from LTA, and the officer was trying very hard not to look uncomfortable. I stood there like a person who has something stuck in his teeth and can't decide whether to ask for a toothpick. Then I did the thing that I now realize is characteristic of me. I delayed by being professional. I filmed the officer, got a few lines about safety, got B-roll of a caterpillar that had fallen onto a rubber track and was inching along. When I finally told them in the container, Mei Lin said, "Some ancestor of Collingridge updated the book as a gimmick," and I wanted to agree just to watch her face relax. The next ordinary thing turned heavy. We chalked a stone with a surname that matched an entry from 1891, and my hand shook so much the letters looked like a child's. Amir teased me and rewrote it better. His radio said, "Amir," in a voice like it was learning his name for the first time. Uncle Lim brewed coffee and set a cup next to the diary the way you set a glass next to a guest. The night pressed on and the generator coughed twice and stopped, the way machines stop when they've been humming a long time and suddenly realize they're tired. We all paused. The floodlights floated down to dim like your eyes half lit when you're falling asleep. In the second before they dipped out entirely, I thought I saw movement along the slope. 3 or 4 shapes stepping between stones, not hiding, not approaching, just walking. Then everything was dark and the air held that heavy silence that isn't silence but the absence of the one loudest thing. We all swore at once. Raj thumped the generator with a wrench. The lights throbbed back. There was no one on the slope. The diary was open when I went back to the container. I know I closed it. I was raised to close things. Inside, someone had underlined the phrase, "Do not leave unobserved." It looked like pencil, not ink, and that's what I told myself, because graphite makes more sense in a lightning bright night like that. I looked for a pencil. I found one on the desk and snorted at myself. I can hear my own contempt on the audio. I recorded everything reflexively. People don't always make sense, even to themselves, under floods. Amir got spooked after that. He said it like a joke. "Bro, if my full name shows up in there, I'm going to the mosque on my lunch break and never coming back." But he bounced his leg on the excavator's step and checked his phone more than he worked it. He had a baby at home and a wife who teased him by sending him sleepy face photos of the kid with new hats on. He kept showing us the latest one. "Dude looks like an angry mushroom," he'd say, proud. We tried to get reasonable. We called a friend of May Lynn's at the archives to ask if anyone had cataloged a Reverend Collingridge. The friend said he'd look into it, and his voice did that thing where it's trying not to feed a fire. Mr. Coe called his boss and said something about chain of custody and about how any weirdness would make the papers and we needed to stay ahead of it. He used the word narrative. I noticed he didn't touch the diary again. The night that folds into my hands like paper happened after a Sunday rain that made the whole hill smell like a garden. We had a smaller team. The weekend crew was short, and the site manager allowed work to stretch a little later than usual to catch up. The police had come by in the afternoon to ask about reports of trespassers making videos. Uncle Lim had gotten into a polite argument with them about kids being kids versus respect. It was one of those days where a dozen small things fray your patience. We were tired. The mud grabbed your boots and let go reluctantly. There were mosquitoes that bit through socks. We were finishing the documentation of a row along the slope when the radios clicked in sequence. 1, 2, 3, like someone pushing buttons gently. "Do not leave unobserved," said a voice that could have been mine if I had a cold. On the table in the container, the diary was open to a page we hadn't seen. It was dated the following Monday, and it listed 3 plot numbers and a 4th line that wasn't a plot number. It was a sentence. Operator slips from step. Documenter left of camera. Security facing slope. The dates next to our names were there. The time was 3:18 a.m. The second hand on the clock next to the fan made a clicking noise I'd never noticed before. We didn't tell Raj right away. We didn't tell Mr. Coe. We told each other with eyes. "Don't slip," I told Amir silently across the work light's beam. "Don't do it. Don't be the sentence." He nodded the way people nod at funerals and then forced himself to half laugh. "Okay, we're not giving the book what it wants," he said, which was a weird thing to say about an object we worked like acting in a bad play. Every movement we exaggerated for safety. We kept both hands on ladders. We turned to check each other like we were on a high ledge. And for a while work was just work again, because when you're careful, time stretches and becomes made of tasks instead of ideas. We measured. We photographed. I dictation noted headstone details out loud so the audio had it, and Maylin corrected my pronunciation gently. When I raised the camera to reframe a shot, my left foot moved half a step like a reflex. I must have thought I was avoiding a root. There was no root. My foot slid into a pocket of slick mud and I pitched sideways. The camera didn't fall. The strap dug into my neck. My arm shot out instinctively to the left, exactly where the diary had said I would be. It wasn't dramatic. No one screamed. Amir saw me catch myself and said, "Careful, the way you say it to someone you love that you pretend you don't." I laughed. I laughed because I had to break the line the book wrote. "There," I said, gravelly and absurd. Left of camera. We did it. I replayed the moment in my head with an exaggerated sense of victory like I'd judo flipped a sentence. It was nothing, and yet I felt like I had stepped between rails and watched a train pass through me. The radio replied in a soft voice that was not mine and not Amir's and not Uncle Lim's and not anyone I want to meet. "Observed," it said. It sounded pleased. At 3:18 a.m., the generator coughed and the floodlights flickered again. Not off, just enough to pulse the world dark once. On the slope, 3 figures stood at different distances just at the edge of the light's furthest reach. You know the way someone looks when you see them at the corner of your eye and your brain fills in a face you can't prove? It was like that, except my brain didn't want to fill anything in. They weren't threatening. They didn't move like people trying to scare us. They stood like family at the back of a hall, quiet and patient, waiting for a nod that would let them come forward. Uncle Lim whispered something in Hokkien that I don't speak, and then in English to be thorough. "Please, we are doing our best." We didn't go home early or end with a chase. After the light rippled and the figures stayed where they were for a long, long minute that probably wasn't, we did the thing we'd been told to do. We packed up with care. We stacked the flags. We sealed our bags. We closed the container and locked it. The diary was on the table like a guest who declined a ride and said they would walk, thank you. I filmed it because I knew someone would accuse me of making it up later. The fan clicked behind it like a slow metronome. We handed the diary over the next morning with a receipt that had too many carbon copies. The National Heritage Board officer who took it wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said they would examine and conserve and update us. That night, the container felt a little larger and a little emptier. The radios behaved. The chalk stayed where we put it. The flag stopped wandering. The work returned to being a series of actions that had meaning only because we decided so. I slept that day like the dead. 3 things happened after, in the weeks we wound down. I found an envelope on my office chair when I came home from a long shoot. There was no return address, just my name written in a precise hand. Inside was a black and white photocopy of 1 page of the diary. It was the list with our names. Next to mine, someone had added in pencil a small check mark and a time, 3:18. I looked at the postmark. It wasn't a postmark. It had been slipped under my door. Amir quit the project early. He said it was for family reasons and because he'd picked up contract work closer to home. We hugged and joked that he'd missed the mosquitoes more than us. On the date written next to his name, he texted our group chat a photo of his baby in a ridiculous sun hat with a message that just said, "Look who's sitting up." We all cheered. I sent 3 heart emojis because I didn't have better words. Later that afternoon, he messaged again that he'd been delayed by a minor fender bender outside his block. "All okay," he wrote. "Inshallah, small troubles only. It wasn't serious. He was fine. I tell you this because you might be looking for a sharp thing, a crashing thing, and there wasn't one. Not then. The last thing is small and I can't prove it." A week after we cleared our section and moved to paperwork, I walked past a stone near the slope. The chalk had washed from it in the rain, but there was a faint dusting where the letters had been. Someone, in a moment of boredom or reverence or nothing at all, had traced my surname into the damp with a fingertip. It had half melted. It looked like a word trying to become earth. I could stop there and let you decide if we invented a mystery because we were tired, or found a mid-century prank, or got played by interference and pareidolia and hindsight. I keep trying to be that person in my own head. I tell myself a National Archive has the diary, now, and someone with actual training can date the paper and test the ink, and prove it's a clever art project or a misfiled prop. I tell myself I shifted my foot because mud is mud, and the generator coughed at 3:18 because the fuel mix was off. When I play the radio recording, I still hear the little click before the voice, the ordinary mechanical click that happens when you press transmit. But I don't sleep through 3:18 a.m. anymore. I wake a minute before and wait with my eyes closed and my heart grinding like the generator. The nights that are worst are the nothings, the ones where nothing strange happened and therefore nothing ends. I dream I'm standing on the slope with the floodlights buzzing like lazy bees, and the 3 figures are where the light stops, and I am the one who needs to nod to let them come forward, but I don't know why. In some dreams it's raining so softly the rain is part of the light. In some there is no sound at all, not even the insects. In all of them, the diary is open on the table and the page is blank, and I'm holding a pencil I don't remember picking up. 2 weeks ago I met Mei Lin for coffee. We tried to talk about anything else and failed. So she told me her friend at the archives had found a Reverend Collingridge in a missionary record. A man who landed, wrote letters home about heat and charity and the heathen generosity of the hill, and then vanished from the record. Vanished is a dramatic word. It probably means he got reassigned or sick or bored. They're still cataloging, she said. Someone will call us. We sat in the food court aircon and watched people line up for noodle soup. A boy at the next table held a pencil and traced his name on a napkin, then folded the napkin into a boat. I want a clean line, a moral, a we shouldn't have done this, or a we learned to bow. Some neat theme to pin the events to. I can't. What I have are sounds and times and the way soil smells after rain. What I have is the understanding that lists are a kind of prayer. We write names down to keep them from slipping. We list to pretend we have the order already inside us. Collingridge wrote his lists and someone kept adding to them, and then so did we. Maybe the list never ends. Maybe that's the whole thing. Tonight I will wake up at 3:17 and lie there. I will hear a scooter pass 3 streets over and a cat argue with another cat, and my upstairs neighbor cough. I will think about Amir's baby and the way kids sit up like mushrooms. I will think about Uncle Lim's coffee, the kind that leaves grit at the bottom of your cup you can read like tea leaves if you try. I will think about the way the 3 figures waited without malice. I will think about the blank page. I will think about the Reverend's neat, slightly fussy handwriting. I will keep my eyes closed. When the minute turns, my phone sometimes buzzes with no notification. It's probably a network hiccup. In the second that follows, I sometimes hear a click like a radio keying on in another room. If I open my eyes, there is nothing there but my own wall and the outline of my camera bag on a chair. Sometimes I go to my desk and take out the copy of the photocopy and look at the check mark by my name, as if paper can run out of its own story. Sometimes I put the paper back very carefully, like returning a book to a library you shouldn't know how to find. I don't have advice. I don't even have a neat last sentence. There's just this. If you're at Book at Brown at night for any reason and you hear the generator cough and the lights drag their shadows wider, don't look into the dark for too long. You'll be tempted to count how many are standing there. Count the living beside you instead. Say their names out loud. Make a list if it helps. Close the book when you're done, even if something inside you wants to stay on the page a little longer. And if you ever find a diary under a stone, wrap it up and hand it to someone whose job it is to hold things that keep their own time. If your name is in there and there's a small check next to it, don't panic. It doesn't mean what you think it does. Or maybe it does, but not in the way you fear. Maybe it only means someone was watching. Maybe it means you were not left unobserved. Maybe in the end, that's all any of us get. I've put people in the ground for a living since I was 19. So believe me when I say I don't scare easy. Dirt is honest even when people aren't. It slides and it settles, and if you cut it right and shore it where it wants to cave, it behaves. I never thought I'd write any of this down because it sounds like one of those stories old guys tell to haze the new kid on the crew. But I need to get it off my chest. My name's Daniel. I grew up on the east side of El Paso, and for the last 11 years I've been a gravedigger with a little maintenance mixed in at a big cemetery out near the Loop. It's the one with the white stone wall and the iron arch that squeals when the wind pushes it, where the grass has to be coaxed into staying green because the desert is right there, patient as a dog at the screen door. Most days I prep plots, run the backhoe, line graves with the fake turf so families don't have to look at raw earth. I pick up old plastic flowers that get baked to chalk in July, chase off javelinas that nose at the water stations, change out the lanterns in the columbarium before they burn down too low. I usually come in stupid early, like 3 or 4, because that's when the air doesn't feel like it's punching back. It's quiet then, just the buzz from the highway, train horns way off toward the east, a couple of coyotes on the other side of the fence that pretend they're ghosts when you shine a light at them, and the sprinklers ticking their circles like a slow clock. We're a small crew. There's me, there's Miguel, my best friend since sophomore year when we both got kicked from JV for missing too many practices. And there's Paula, who runs the office and knows every marker number by heart like their birthdays. On funerals, we pull in 2 or 3 part-timers, and Father Ortiz from St. Julian's will show up with his binder and his thermos and give us that nod that means we did the prep right. The rest of the time, we keep our heads down and do what the schedule says. The schedule is everything. There's a book in the office with times and sections and plot numbers, and Paula checks it twice before she tapes that little paper grid to the door. It's not complicated work if you respect it. In August, the heat set in early and didn't let up. At 4 in the morning, it felt like standing in front of a dryer. The desert did that dead excited thing it does before a storm. Like even the dirt is waiting for the first fat drops to pop open the smell of creosote. I came in like normal, unlocked the equipment shed, pulled my gloves out of my back pocket where I always tuck them so the thumb won't tear, and did a quick pass with the flashlight. When I swung past Section F, I saw a light that didn't make sense. It was a warm flame, not the cold LED from the path stakes we installed last year. It flickered, and the flicker went up and down like breath. I cut through rows of headstones, careful where I stepped because I'm old-fashioned about that, and I found it. An old brass lantern burning steady at the foot of an unmarked patch of dirt. No headstone, no little temporary plastic nameplate, just a rectangle cut clean into the earth and backfilled. Mounded slightly like we do until the settling finishes. Someone had pressed letters into the soil at the foot. The letters were damp and dark and so exact they looked carved. DA, that's me. Those are my initials. The lantern looked exactly like the one my first boss used to carry. Earl. He was from Las Cruces. 60-something when I started, a man who had opinions about shovels like other people have opinions about football. The cemetery used to issue us brass lanterns with little mantles and a knob that sticks if you over-tighten. By the time I came on, those were already disappearing. We had cheap LED headlamps and a few halogens on poles for night work. Earl kept his lantern, though. He'd baby it, Polish the soot off the glass with the corner of his shirt. Use it only at dawn because he said that flame light is kinder to the dead. After he retired, the brass lantern disappeared. Paula said his daughter came to pick it up. I don't know. I just know there it was, burning smooth as if it had been lit 10 minutes ago. And at its base, the earth shaped into my initials. I stood there a while listening to the sprinkler clicks and the hiss of the burner, and the soft grit of sand moving under my boots. The kind of little noises you only hear if you cut your own breathing down. I told myself the initials were a trick of the dirt clumps. I told myself some kid slid under the fence and thought he was being cute. I blew out the flame with a quick puff like you do to candles so you don't splash wax. But nothing splashed, of course. The whole thing went dark and left me with my own reflection on the soot-blackened glass. I picked the lantern up to bring it back to the shed, and that's when I noticed the dent on the collar. Earl's lantern had a dent the shape of a thumbnail, a crescent right where your left hand naturally grabs when you pour fuel. Same spot, same shallow bite. Miguel rolled in late because the storm teased out some traffic. He saw the lantern in the passenger seat of the Gator when I pulled back to the shed. He tapped it with his knuckle and shrugged. Trying to be fancy? Found it at F, I said. Burning. Who lit it? He asked, which is a funny question if you think about it because the answer felt like it should be obvious even though it wasn't. I told him what I saw. He went quiet in that way he does where all his jokes go into a pocket for later. He scratched his chin and made a face at the heat coming off the asphalt. You checked the board? We checked the board. No interments scheduled in F for another week. Nothing was supposed to be open, not even a prep. Paula came in at 5 with a cup from the gas station, and that look she gets when she's already read 3 emails from someone who doesn't know how to attach a PDF. We told her. She flipped from the board to the spreadsheet to the folder on the shelf where she keeps handwritten cards for the older plots. Because some families never updated. The owner list for F rows 10 through 18 was quiet. No one had paid for prep. No one had died. At least not in those addresses. By then the sky had turned that light gray that makes everything look like it's underwater. The storm moved off over the Franklin Mountains and didn't deliver. I went back to F while Miguel got the backhoe warmed and Paula called the grounds camera guy. The grave was there. The rectangle was clean. I can tell the difference between the way earth settles after time and the way it looks when it was cut yesterday. This was fresh. The turf around the edges had been rolled back the way we do it. The backfill was even. Someone who knew how to do this had done it. I crouched and ran my glove over those initials like maybe they'd smudge, but they held. The soil was damp enough to take shape from a firm press. It made me think of kneeling at the river as a kid and smoothing little shelves in the mud with the heel of my hand to float bottle caps like boats. By 7, Paula had the camera feed up on her monitor. We stood behind her in the office, 2 sweaty guys trying to make ourselves small so we didn't drip on the keyboard while the little wheel spun. The camera that covers Section F lost signal from 213 to 401. The box just shows a frozen picture, then a burst of static, then the shot comes back with the first pink line of dawn and nothing moving except the sprinkler heads. Miguel said, "Huh," and Paula rubbed her eyes. She called the company that installed our system. They said it happens when there's a power flicker. We all looked at the wall clock, which had stopped at 2:14 the way ghost stories say clocks do. Except our clock stops at least twice a week because it's older than me. We decided to level the mound, tamp it, and call it vandalism. That's the official term when kids do something that makes work for us. We stamped the dirt flat and kept an eye on it during the day. No more initials showed. I forgot about it except for when I looked at that lantern on the corner of my workbench and felt the little come-on of an old habit. The one that says, light it and see. I didn't. Earl's face came to me, his eyebrows like 2 gray question marks under the brim of his hat, and I left the thing alone. The next morning I got in at 3:10. Because I couldn't sleep right and the air felt better then, I did the same loop, checking the faucet near the maintenance road that always drips, checking the chain on the side gate because someone is always trying to slip it. When I cut down the center path of F, I didn't need a flashlight. I could see the lantern from maybe 50 yards. It burned steady, the kind of steady flame you get when the wick is set right and the fuel is fresh. It sat in the same spot. The grave looked the way it did yesterday before we stomped it flat. The dirt was mounded again. At the foot, my initials were pressed clean as ever. I can't explain the feeling I got then except to say it was like walking back into your house and finding the kitchen chair pulled out 6 inches from the table when you know you pushed it in tight. Ordinary wrong, the kind that makes you feel stupid. I didn't touch the lantern. I just stood there and listened. There was a couple on the far side of the fence walking a dog with a light-up collar. I could hear the little clacks of its nails in their shoes on the sidewalk, slow and sleepy. Somewhere beyond the wall, someone's swamp cooler kicked on with that rattle that sounds like a radio between stations. The lantern made a soft whisper. I caught myself tasting fuel in the back of my throat the way you do when you fill your mower, that sweet sting on the tongue. I said my name out loud by accident. Daniel. Like I'd heard someone calling me and needed to answer, and I couldn't tell if I had heard my own name first or said it first. Miguel showed up and I didn't let him go to the office. I waved him in, and we stood looking at it together like we were trying to see the trick. He crouched and pressed the dirt with his fingers. He grunted, then looked up at me with the expression he only uses at other people's funerals, that mix of respect and worry. "How about we dig down a little?" he said. "Not a lot. Just enough to see if someone's screwing with us." "We don't have authorization," I said, because it felt like it needed to be said out loud, even though both of us had already started picturing the shovel slices. We looked at the office. We looked at the sky, which had decided to be blue. We looked at the ground again. Miguel handed me a shovel. We cut the rectangle carefully like you'd peel back the lid of a cake pan. The top 6 inches were loose, recent. Below that, the soil changed to the packed clay this place sits on. You have to lean into your shovel for that stuff, and even then it gives like you're asking permission. We dug down maybe 18 inches, just enough to stir the settled earth and make our backs know we were doing something dumb. There was nothing. No liner, no box, no vault, no sign of bones, God forbid. It was a grave-shaped hole in the beginnings of one, and that was all. The sound it made when we tamped it back was wrong. I can't say exactly how. Too hollow, like there was a space farther down. We went shallow, so maybe that's all it was. Miguel looked spooked when he pretended not to be. He laughed and told me I'd been sleepwalking out here with my grandpa's lantern and carving my initials like a lovesick high schooler. I laughed because you have to push it out of your chest somehow. We hosed our boots and went on with our list for the day. By 10, Paula had called the company again to complain about the camera. A guy named Hector came out in a van with cartoon lightning on the side and climbed our pole. He jiggled wires and shrugged and told us our hardware was fine, that if we had an outage again, it was probably a power surge down the line. He suggested a surge protector as if we didn't have a whole cabinet full of them. He handed Paula a card and left. Before he pulled away, he rolled down his window and asked me, "You know a man named Earl used to work here?" I told him yes. He said his father knew him from the VFW. He said Earl would come in with the old guys and sit in the corner and argue about whether a grave should be a hair wider, because people were bigger now. He said Earl always had a lantern in the bed of his truck. He said it like you might say a person always wore a hat. It made me feel like I'd been caught with a hand in someone's memory. That night after supper, I drove back by the cemetery. I was ashamed of it, like I was checking on an ex. I told myself I left a tool out. I parked by the office where the cameras would see me and walked slow. The air had that ragged feeling it gets before a haboob, dust trying to organize itself into a plan. I didn't make it to F. I saw the glow from halfway down the first lane, the lantern blooming softly like it was early morning again. I stood outside the chain for a long time, listening for a reason not to go in. I'm the one who locks the gates, so the reason wasn't going to be a lock. The reason would have to be me, and I didn't do a good job being a reason. I went in. The lantern was milky bright, the flame steady and a little taller than before. There were no shadows flapping at the edges the way flame shadows like to. It was just bright. I felt the little hairs on my wrist lean toward the glass. I blew the thing out. I carried it to the shed, angry then, like you get when you don't know whether you're embarrassed or mad. I locked it inside a cabinet we use for solvents, the kind you have to push the handle down and turn to open, the kind with a fireproof rating stamped on the side. I told myself if it showed up again, I'd take it home and call Earl's daughter, if there even was an Earl's daughter. The third morning it happened. It was burning next to that grave that keeps not being a grave. The dirt was mounded again. My initials pressed neat and dark. The letters looked like they had been made by a hand bigger than mine. The curve of the D wasn't exactly how I write, but the damage of it looked like me. I did the thing no one in a story like this should do, which is decide to stay overnight. I clocked out, went home, told my sister, she lives with me now since our mom moved into a quieter apartment across town, that I had to monitor some equipment because the cameras were acting up. She said, that place needs new plants, not more cameras, and fell asleep on the couch with some show about bakers judging other bakers for making cake that looks like a shoe. I got a thermos and 2 bologna sandwiches and my old Olympus recorder that I used to use when I wanted to remember exactly what a family requested at a funeral, and I drove back at midnight. The cemetery after midnight is different than the cemetery at 4. It's not just darker. The city noise is thinner, like somebody pulled a blanket farther over it. The bats take the paths like they're freeways. The wind has more room to talk. I parked near section C and walked in the dark to F because my own light felt rude. I sat on the bench we keep for old man Panita, who comes every Thursday morning and sings 2 verses of the same hymn to his wife, and I watched a piece of dirt. If you ever want to understand how long a minute can be, stare at 1 square foot of ground and ask it to do something. At 1:40, the recorder picked up 3 footfalls. Whose, I can't tell you. The sound is the kind you can only describe as gravel having a thought. I said hello like an idiot, quietly, as if loud would spook whatever was willing to be here. Nothing answered. At 2:01, the air moved around me like someone took a big step down and the space needed to stretch to make room. I smelled rain without rain in it. My eyes watered the way they do when dust touches the place where your nose meets your throat. I pressed pause on my recorder because I didn't want to hear my own breathing later. I stood up and watched the dark not change. At 2:13, if you believe the stamped time, the flame lit. I didn't see the spark. I looked left for a second because I heard the chain link rattle near the drainage ditch, and when I looked back, the lantern was burning like it had always been burning. I hadn't brought it out. I had locked it in the solvent cabinet. I marched to the shed in a heat that didn't have anything to do with weather. The cabinet was closed. When I opened it, the smell of fuel hit me so hard my eyes ran. The shelf was empty. I said a word I won't write. I went back out, following my own angry footsteps. When I got to the grave, the initials were there, sharp and dark, as if made by a stamp, as if some machine had come by and cleanly pressed the surface with a block that said D.A., my name in the dirt. I crouched. I pressed my palm to the soil because some old part of my head still believed you can feel a heartbeat in a place if something is under there. It was warm, not hot like heated, just warmer than it should have been at 2-something in the morning. The warmth got into my gloves and sat there like an apology you didn't order. I spoke to the dirt like a child. If I did something, I said. If I did something and I don't remember, I'm sorry. I felt stupid and mean and sad at once, which is a cocktail grief makes when it's got no cup. Wind moved across the grass and made the plastic flowers on the nearby graves knock with their stems against the vases. Nick, 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 a little bone sound, even though I promised no bone talk. The lantern flame leaned and then stood back up straight. The earth under my hand loosened like maybe it had smiled. It's funny now to write that. It wasn't funny then. Miguel called me because he couldn't sleep and saw my truck on the GPS we share for work when we borrow the gator on weekends. He said, "You at the yard?" I told him yes. He said, "Hon, I'm coming." He showed up 20 minutes later with coffee that tasted like pennies and a piece of sweet bread he put in my hand because men in our family fix everything that way first. He stood with me staring at the lantern. His mouth made that shape it makes when he's about to say something stupid on purpose and then doesn't. Finally, he said, "Maybe it's telling you to dig. You want to open a hole at 2 in the morning because a stolen lantern told you to?" "I want to see what happens," he said. "This is going to happen whether we stand here or not, and I'm not leaving you alone with it." So we dug again, stupid careful, the way some guys take apart their guns on a towel and never mix pieces. We cut the rectangle. We went down past our last line to where the clay starts to remember the pressure of centuries. The place I pressed my hand stayed warmer, not hot, just wrong. The sound of the shovel was hollow again, but it wasn't empty. It was like the ground had a chest that wasn't made for air. I found a little thing in the dirt, a button maybe, a round bit of metal that pinched the light. I thought it might be a coin, which happens sometimes when families toss favorite things in, and the backfill later coughs them up. I rinsed it with a trickle from my bottle and laughed a little dry laugh at myself. It was a rivet top from a pair of jeans. The brand stamp was the same as the ones I buy from Walmart when mine are too far gone. That could mean nothing. It felt like nothing pretending to be something. I put it on the little tarp. The wind nudged the lantern glass and made a sound like a breath through teeth. At 2:47, a patrol car rolled by slowly on the road outside the fence. The red and blue washed over the stones. The cop braked, reversed, angled his spotlight too far, and caught us both in the beam. He braked again harder, and the gravel under his tires did the sharp music it does when someone decides to change a plan. He got out and called over the fence in the tone of voice that tries to be casual and safe at once. "Evening, gentlemen, everything all right?" Miguel did the talking. He's better at sounding like a person and not a problem. He said we were monitoring an issue with the irrigation. The cop, Ramos if I remember right, I'd seen him at the gate before. Looked at the shovels and at me and at the lantern burning like it was a showpiece and at the hole we'd opened into nothing. He didn't ask for ID because he knows us. He eased his voice down a notch. "You might not want to be doing whatever that looks like you're doing," he said, which is the most neighborly way to tell someone they're 2 inches from a complaint. "Daniel's initials are on it," Miguel said, because apparently we were doing this out loud. Ramos squinted at the ground. He tilted his head like he was trying to shift the letters into sense. "Okay," he said. "Okay," he said again, like the second okay would be the one that didn't fall down. "Do you want me to call someone?" He meant Paula, or the manager who only shows up for funerals because he sells insurance the rest of the time, or Father Ortiz. I shook my head. I did not want more eyes on the thing that had already made me feel seen by something I did not want to be seen by. He left us with a look that said he'd drive around the block a couple of times and pretend it was patrol. We filled the hole back because there was nothing else to do. Miguel tamped it and I leveled it, and the lantern stayed exactly the same brightness, like a lamp on a house nobody lives in. Dawn dripped color down the far side of the mountains. The coyotes stopped pretending. Buses started making their first sounds. The lantern flame made a last small reach toward the glass and then dropped like someone pinched the wick. I don't know if I blew it out. I'm telling you, I don't remember raising my hand to do it. I remember the smell that was like a candle after a prayer, clean and a little sad. That smell hung on the air while the world did what it always does and turned itself into day. Paula watched us come back to the office like she knew all of it without any of it having happened yet. She opened her mouth in that way she does when she's about to argue with paperwork, and then she shut it. "Don't put it in the report," she said deadpan. "I don't have a form." When she smiled, you could see exactly how tired she was under it. She's buried 2 husbands and a son. She does not have room for a haunted light. I set the lantern on the floor by my desk. I put my foot on the base like you might put a foot on the foot of a dog that belongs to you to let it know you're there. I felt the metal cool. I felt normal creeping back in like a cheap blanket. For a week, nothing happened. We filled 2 regular graves, prepped a 3rd, took delivery of 3 stones, planted 2 desert willows that the manager swears will love the alkaline soil if we just give them time, and put up a sign about plastic flowers melting to the vases. Miguel made a joke about the lantern every day that got less funny and more like theater. I put the lantern in the trunk of my car and then took it out because it felt like stealing. On Thursday morning, Mr. Pineda sang his hymn. On Friday, the sky broke open and gave us 15 minutes of rain that achieved nothing except to make everything smell extraordinary for 1 blissful hour. On Saturday, I got a call from my sister. She said, "Did you leave this on the porch?" It was 7 in the morning. I was still in bed, the only time I've ever been when a phone rang with that tone. I said, "Leave what?" She said, "A lantern. It's old. It's lit." I sat up so fast I got the head rush you get when you're 12 and stand too quickly at church. I told her, "Don't touch it." She said, "You sound like Mom," and laughed in a way that tried to make it a joke and didn't make it. I drove home. The brass lantern sat on the concrete by the welcome mat. The flame was low, the way it gets when the fuel's about to go, that redder kind of light that looks tired. My initials were pressed into the damp layer of dust on the step like someone had written in the dew. I would have thought my sister had done it to bust me if I didn't know her well enough to know her jokes don't look like that. She stood inside the screen door in her robe and said, "You going to tell me why something from your work is on our porch?" I did not have a story that made sense. I lied and said I was cleaning it and left it here on accident last night when I came home to get something I'd forgotten. She looked at me like she did when I told her I wasn't the one who dinged the neighbor's car in 2009. She knows the difference between a mistake and a story. I carried the lantern to the truck and drove back to the cemetery in the kind of quiet you feel in your knuckles. I put it in Paula's office and said, "If anyone comes for this, tell them they can have it." She nodded like she wanted to be done with the kind of day where a sentence like that makes sense. We did our list. We avoided Section F like adults who don't have to touch a stove to know it's hot. At noon, a family came in to place flowers and a little ceramic hummingbird on a grave near F. I watched them from a respectful distance while I pretended to adjust a sprinkler. The dad told his kid to stop stepping on the grass because he'd heard somewhere it's bad luck. The kid kept doing it and nothing happened. The world is full of days like that. I don't know what I want you to believe about the next part. I went back to F at the end of my shift because I needed to feel stupid again in order to feel normal. The ground at the spot was flat and correct, like nothing had ever been wrong with it. No initials, no mound. The dirt had dried to a uniform pale crust after the sprinkles. The impression of the rectangle was gone. Even the lines our shovel had left were smoothed as if someone had ironed the earth. For a second, I let myself think I had misremembered the location. I know better. You learn the map of a place in your bones if you work with it that long. I crouched and pressed my palm to where I knew. It wasn't warm or cold. It was ground. I smiled at nothing in that way that probably looked strange from far away. I walked back toward the shed and passed by the columbarium wall. A woman in a pink cap was standing there with her hand on the niche door, like she was checking if it was locked. "Is there a problem?" I asked, polite. She jumped and then laughed in that embarrassed little way people do when you catch them being human. No, she said. "I just like to make sure." She asked me if I could help her find a marker for her uncle. I did. I pointed her down 2 rows and told her count 4 in from the path. She thanked me and went the wrong way first and then the right way. And then she stood there and did the small thing people do where they talk under their breath and say someone's name and pretend the name is a handle. On my way back to the shed, I saw the lantern again. It sat on the bench by Mr. Pineda's spot. It wasn't lit. It looked duller than before, like some of the shine had given up. I picked it up and felt the dent with my thumb and knew it the way you know your own keys on a ring. I put it in the solvent cabinet again because I keep trying to do the thing that proves something can't happen again. I locked the cabinet. I felt better. I woke that night at 2:13 without an alarm. The house was too quiet, the way it gets when even the fridge cooperates. My sister's door was open 2 inches because she hates closing it all the way. Across the hallway, the bathroom nightlight made its little dome of orange. I listened for the little clicks of the AC and didn't hear them. I went to the kitchen and stood with my hands on the cool laminate because it makes me feel like I'm holding on to something I paid for. I told myself a thing that wasn't true. If I didn't go to the cemetery, nothing would happen. My brain is not smarter than whatever this is. I drove. The roads were empty except for a man riding a bicycle with a milk crate on the back, and I wondered where that man was always going and whether it was the same place every night. You know how this part goes. The lantern was burning. The grave was a mound of neat dirt. My initials were in the soil like a neat, well-behaved wound. The camera on the pole had its little red light on, buzzing with a tone I don't think it usually makes and might have been my imagination. I put my hand on the ground and said, "Okay." I said, okay. I said, "What do you want?" like I was bartering at a market and not talking to what might be the inside of the ground. That's when I heard the other sound. Not the sprinklers, not the hum of the far highway, not the plastic flowers tapping their vases. It was the sound of someone shifting their weight down in a tight place. A soft adjusting, a little grit falling against wood maybe. The creak of something that had options and chose to hold for now. I know what I promised about keeping it safe. I'm not breaking that. There was nothing you could call violent, just the sense that something that was not me and not the top of the world was there, waiting in the patient way desert things wait. I froze so hard my breath went on strike. And then, like we'd rehearsed it, the lantern flame leaned again and straightened. The warmth came up through my glove into my skin. The soft adjusting sound settled into a quiet that was so complete it felt like I had put my head under water. I almost started digging again. I almost did the dumbest possible human thing and took the rest of the night trying to reach something I had no plan for if I reached. And then the look on Miguel's face from the other night came into my head. My friend holding a shovel like a lifeline and trying to be brave for me instead of himself. I stepped back. I said out loud, not tonight. The way you tell a dog you love that you can't throw the ball right now because you don't have a hand free. I did not look away until the flame lit itself and went down without smoke. I don't have a good ending for you. I went home and slept a little with my boots on, which my sister made fun of. We went to work and did our list. We looked at the camera footage and watched it freeze right where it always does, 2:13 to 4:01, and come back with its little hops. Paula told me not to tell Father Ortiz because she did not want to sit through a talk about the thin places, and because she knows how stories stick to a place like stickers that take a layer of paint with them when you peel them off. I thought about quitting. I did not quit. I asked for 2 days off and drove up to Las Cruces because Earl is buried there, and I stood at his headstone like a kid at a teacher's door after school. I told him I was trying to do right. The wind blew so hard the little flags on the veterans section sounded like 100 hands clapping a beat. No one taught them. I drove back in silence for 50 miles and then put the radio on too loud because silence felt too much like a mirror. Since then, I still come in early. I check the gate and the hose and the stupid faucet. Sometimes the lantern is there, sometimes not. When it is, I stand with it and say nothing. When it isn't, I look anyway and think maybe this is the morning it will be. We haven't added a headstone where the mound appears. We haven't put a name. Paula says she doesn't have a form for "the ground wants a word." Miguel says he'll be there if I ever decide to dig deep and see. I believe him. I hope I never ask. 2 weeks ago, a family brought a flat stone to set where the mound isn't. They had a permit. The plot was theirs for a cousin who died in '98 and asked to be moved closer to his mother. We set the stone. The letters gleamed. The ground was stubborn where we needed the stake to go in, like we were pressing a thumb into a closed eye. When they left, I sat on the bench and waited. Nothing happened until the end of the day, when the light went sideways and made all the names look like the first day they were carved. The wind lifted the corner of the fake grass on a plot we weren't using. A plastic angel fell and righted itself when the gust eased. I started to feel stupid, and then I smelled the clean, sad candle smell. The lantern was lit on the far end of the row, not near the mound, but near a little patch where the irrigation fails sometimes. I walked to it and crouched and found nothing under my hand but cool soil, patient and closed. The initials weren't there. Nothing was. I blew the flame and waited for the little goodbye smoke that never happens with these old mantles. I told myself I would take the lantern home, and I did, and it's in my hall closet behind a stack of winter blankets we don't need. Last night at 2:13, my doorbell camera sent me a clip. It's not interesting. A moth flies up. The street light across the way flickers. The timestamp jumps, then returns like maybe my Wi-Fi hiccuped. I watched it twice, 3 times, then I quit because you can't stare at a blank wall and expect it to explain itself. I went to the closet and put my hand on the brass through the blanket edge. It was cool. The dent was under my thumb like it always is. I stood there and listened to my small, quiet house hold itself up. I made coffee I didn't drink. At 4:01 exactly, because I looked, I drove the long way to work, the way that takes you past the cemetery wall before you turn in at the main gate. The sky was the soft gray that makes you forget all the hard things for a minute. In the mirror, just for a second, I saw a flicker. Not bright. Just enough to make my eyes think of a candle in another room. When I turned to look, the wall was stone and lichen and a bit of bougainvillea snagged from Mrs. Ortega's fence next door. Maybe the grave is nothing. Maybe I'm writing this because the summer was long and the heat picked at the edge of thoughts I usually keep stacked and neat. But I know where that dirt remembers me. I know my initials look right and wrong at once when they show up there. I know I keep waking at 2:13 and not by accident. I know the lantern that belongs in someone's trunk or on someone's mantle keeps honoring the hour like the dead use it as a door. If you come to our cemetery and walk Section F at dawn, you might see a man in a work shirt standing with his hands behind his back like he's listening for something you don't hear. That will be me. You can say my name. I'll turn. I'll pretend to be normal. I'll point you to your aunt's grave or your cousin's marker, and I will help you carry the little stone you brought to set at the foot. And if you ever notice a fresh mound where we didn't put one and initials pressed into the soil like the ground took a breath and made a note, please don't tell Paula I told you any of this. She doesn't have a form, and I'm not sure I want to know what gets written on the line where the name should go.